Chapter 493. For a country, the year was like a person's name. It was not necessarily resounding, but it must be there. Therefore, every country in the world had its own year. But there were only two kinds of years that could be remembered by the people and used effectively in daily life. Time passed, and it was the 16th year of Tianqi era in the Tang Empire, which was the 3447th year of Daji of West Hill. Many things happened in the spring of this year. Yi Hongyu, the Tao addict, finally returned after leaving the West Hill Divine Palace for a whole year. She killed Chunbachi under countless horrified gazes, and then walked into the Black Divine Hall of Judgment. The moment she stepped into the Divine Hall, a majestic voice sounded from the depths of the hall. A huge sound wave hit the wall made of black boulders, shattering into countless fine and ear-piercing sounds that were as sharp as steel needles. They instantly came in front of her and shrouded her body. You are the first person to betray the Divine Hall and dare to come back. Are you here to be punished? The majestic voice pierced her eardrums like thousands of steel needles. Yi Hongyu frowned slightly but did not respond. She just looked indifferently into the depths of the Divine Hall. There was a dazzling bead curtain in the depths of the Divine Hall. Behind the bead curtain, a huge blood-colored black jade throne could be vaguely seen, and the majestic figure on the throne could be seen. Just like in the past years, the voice that came from the black jade throne stirred up cold divine power and looked down on everything in the world. Today there was even some mockery in it. Yi Hongyu was extremely devout, truly devout. Therefore, she did not think that her leaving the West Hill Divine Palace was a betrayal. But she did not want to defend herself to the voice behind the curtain. She just wanted to walk to the bead curtain and finish what she was going to do. She thought so she did it. She walked quietly into the Divine Hall of Judgment. Her Scion Taoist robe fluttered slowly on the black smooth ground, like a green leaf walking in the dark night. It was inconspicuous but very eye-catching. A priest of the judicial department stood beside the stone pillar and looked at her and shouted, "How dare you?" Another priest from the judicial department shouted furiously, "How dare you?" More and more heavenly officials rushed out, their red robes surging on the vast black ground like blood. However, they gathered together to form a lake of blood. Furious and cold shouts of rebuke continuously rang out. Impudent! Yi Hongyu's thunderous rebuke did not change her expression at all. She was still as calm and indifferent as ever. Every step she took was exactly the same distance. Yi Hongyu's faith in Haotian was impeccable, but she was not one of those foolish believers who cried when they saw the divine temple. She respected nothing but Haotian. That was why she did not choose to give in when she was pressured by the hierarch and the great divine priest of judgment. Instead, she left the West Hill Divine Palace resolutely, and did not hesitate to bear the crime of being a traitor of Haotian Taoism. That was why she returned to the West Hill Divine Palace today, and walked towards the bead curtain. She was an extremely impudent person in the first place. Everything she did was extremely impudent. So how could she be moved at all when the red-robed divine officials in the Black Divine Hall berated her for being impudent? She walked towards the depths of the Divine Hall. Those heavenly officials from the judicial department wearing blood-red robes were extremely angry. They were trembling with anger and their faces were red. However, it was strange that no one dared to stand in front of her and attack her. Yi Hongyu walked into the crowd of heavenly officials. The heavenly officials retreated in horror and made a path for her. It was like a green leaf falling into a bloody lake of blood. The lake water parted and retreated towards the shore, not daring to touch the green leaf. Finally, she walked from the outside of the Divine Hall to the bead curtain. She stopped and calmly looked over. Behind the bead curtain, the great divine priest of judgment sat on the seat of heavenly black jade. He rested his chin on his hand and seemed to be thinking about something complicated. Yi Hongyu bowed her head and looked calm. It was just like before she went to the wilderness. Every time she came to the Divine Hall, she would meet the great divine priest of judgment behind the curtain. Bowing represented respect, and lowering her head represented obedience. The great divine priest of judgment raised his head slightly. His cold and powerful eyes passed through the bead curtain and fell on her. He said calmly and unquestionably, "Kneel down." This voice was not very loud, but it made those red-robed divine priests who were in a daze wake up and understand a lot of things. The anger and dissatisfaction that came from being belittled and challenged immediately overwhelmed the prestige that the name Tao addict had left to them in the past few years. Even if you had a chance to regain your strength, even if you were still the terrible Tao addict, this was the divine hall of judgment. Behind the bead curtain was the invincible great divine priest of judgment. What else could you do but kneel down? They raised their arms and pointed at Yi Hongyu, who was bowing her head in front of the bead curtain. They shouted in unison, "Kneel down! Kneel down! Kneel down!" These voices were either angry, excited, cold, or cruel. They gradually converged and became very orderly, like thunder echoing in the quiet black divine hall. When Yi Hongyu was still the Tao addict, she never knelt in front of the bead curtain, even if the great divine priest of judgment was behind the curtain. Later, when she was not the Tao addict, she once knelt in front of the bead curtain. That time the divine hall of judgment deliberately gave her pressure and infinite humiliation. From that day on, she vowed that unless she could once again gain the power not to kneel, she would never step into the divine hall of judgment again. Today, she walked into the divine hall of judgment, so of course she would not kneel again. "I only kneel to those who deserve it," Yi Hongyu said. Behind the bead curtain, the great divine priest of judgment slowly sat up and said indifferently, "For example?" Yi Hongyu said, "For example, Haotian the Abidine, the hierarch, the great divine priest of revelation, and divine Lord Lotus. But your name is not among these examples." The great divine priest of judgment said in a cold voice, "How dare you compare me with that devil Lotus?" Yi Hongyu said, "Divine priest, you are not even one petal of divine Lord Lotus. It is indeed wrong to compare you with him." The great divine priest of judgment suddenly laughed. His laughter was full of ruthlessness and coldness. "Don't think that because you have a brother, I really dare not to kill you. Don't forget that this is the divine hall of judgment. We have the special rules bestowed by Haotian." Yi Hongyu raised her head and said coldly, "The anger of judgment should turn into the divine fire of Haotian, but the anger of the great divine priest can only turn into laughter. It is really ridiculous." There was a slight sound of surprise behind the bead curtain. As Yi Hongyu raised her head, the great divine priest of judgment found something very unexpected and interesting, so he decided to let her live. "I didn't expect that you not only recovered your state, but also succeeded in breaking the realm. It is really beyond my expectation. You know the rules of the divine hall of judgment very well. Then come back and be a priest again." The divine hall of judgment punished the world on behalf of Haotian. It followed an unusually realistic and cold rule. Strength represented everything, and the weak should be bullied. Whether it was power or rank, it was only related to strength. If you were no longer strong, then you were no longer qualified to have power and status, and even should not be alive. If you became strong again, then you could have power and status again. Yi Hongyu forced herself to lower her state to escape in the wilderness. Her strength was seriously damaged, and there was no hope of recovery, so she saw coldness and suffered a lot of humiliation. Now that she had recovered and even had more powerful strength, then she was no longer qualified to be humiliated. However, could those things be erased by the words of the great divine priest of judgment, as if they had never happened? For people outside the divine hall of judgment, this was unimaginable. But for those in the divine hall of judgment, this was a very natural thing. Those priests in red robes heard the order of the great divine priest of judgment and quickly stopped scolding Yi Hongyu. They calmly retreated to the side. In the eyes of these priests of the divine hall of judgment, all Yi Hongyu asked for was this sentence from the great divine priest of judgment. The great divine priest of the West Hill Divine Palace was said to be above the great divine priest of Haotian. He was extremely respected, and even the hierarch lord could not casually scold him. How could he apologize to a mortal? The great divine priest of judgment allowed Yi Hongyu to return to the divine hall, and let her continue to be the grand priest of the judicial department. The divine hall of judgment had never been a forgiving place. Yi Hongyu was not a forgiving person either. After hearing the words of the great divine priest of judgment, she smiled slightly. At the moment when the beautiful face revealed a smile, many scenes appeared in front of Yi Hongyu's eyes. On the Yanming Lake in the wind and snow, Ning Ke unbelievably pulled out his padao under the powerful iron spear. However, using the padao as a sword, It was naturally and unstoppably pierced into Xiaoho's abdomen. In the stone house of the West Hill Divine Palace, under the dim light, she tore open the envelope and took out the letter. The clumsy sword on the paper turned into a turbid river. In the mountain of bones, Divine Lord Lotus, who was as skinny as a ghost, grabbed his shoulders tightly. He calmly and mercifully lowered his head and tore off a piece of flesh from his shoulder. At the bottom of the Daming Lake, countless sharp stones blocked the way. She lowered her body and wiped off the green marks on a stone. She saw the 2 sword marks left by Mr. Ku of the Academy. Countless scenes flashed in front of Yi Hongyu's eyes. The 2 sword marks finally merged into one, falling on the yellow paper, falling on the snow lake, falling into her eyes, falling into her heart, and into the scabbard at her waist. Yi Hongyu unsheathed her sword. It was this sword. Then she stabbed at the bead curtain. At the great divine priest of judgment. The black divine hall of judgment, shrouded in the beautiful light of late spring, looked especially solemn. At this moment, countless dust rolled out of the hall and rushed along the stone steps to the cliff plateau. In the white divine hall at the highest point, there was a thunderclap, as if even the gods were shocked and confused. In another divine hall, the great divine priest of revelation sighed softly. In the divine hall of judgment, the red-robed priests fell to the ground. The bead curtain had been completely broken. Yi Hongyu stood behind the bead curtain and in front of the throne. Her right hand holding the sword trembled slightly, and her pale face looked extremely indifferent. She pulled the sword out of the chest of the great divine priest of judgment. Countless blood splashed out from the horrible wound on the chest of the great divine priest of judgment, instantly drenching the blood-colored divine robe and staining Yi Hongyu's green Taoist robe. The great divine priest of judgment frowned and looked at the sword wound on his chest. He said, "It doesn't make sense." Yi Hongyu looked at him and said, "You said that this is the rule that Haotian gave us. So as long as I have the ability to kill you, I dare to kill you." The great divine priest of judgment raised his hand in pain and rage, and then died. Yi Hongyu pulled him down from the throne and sat on it herself. Before sitting on the throne, she had to step on the body of the great divine priest of judgment. From now on, she was the great divine priest of judgment. The seat of heavenly black jade was very big, like a sea of blood. Her green Taoist robe was stained red. Sitting on the throne, she was like a very inconspicuous drop of blood in this sea of blood. But it was the thickest and coldest drop. Yesterday I recommended a book to a friend, but the title of the book was wrong. It should be The Inheritance of the Dark Side. Everyone, please understand. I'm going to the beginning of September. I sincerely ask everyone to vote for me. I will update very little this month, so I'll say it in advance. Goodbye, thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 494. The Jishou Abbey appeared even quieter under the starlight, as if no one had visited it for countless years. The golden thatch hung by the eaves, as if the starlight had become solid. Prince Longqing sat in front of the desk by the window, reading the book in front of him. He completely ignored the ethereal beauty around the Taoist temple. There was only a thirst for new knowledge in his eyes. He seemed so calm and focused, just like the quiet lake in front of the window. When he opened the hand scroll of the tomes of arcane and saw the names of the Tao addict, calligraphy addict, and Ning Ke, he could not help but feel jealousy, hatred, unwillingness, and resentment. As the divine son of West Hill, he should at least stand at the same level as the 3 of them. However, on the snow cliff in the wilderness, all the good things were destroyed by Ning Ke's arrow. Although he had a great lucky chance at the South Sea and set foot on the road of cultivation again, everything was like starting over again. Now he had just entered the see-through realm and seemed to be getting further and further away. However, it did not take long for him to turn all the negative emotions in his heart into nothingness. Because he was now in the Jishou Abbey, as long as he had the corresponding ability, he could read all the tomes of arcane. This was an unimaginable lucky chance. This was the highest level story in the world. Negative emotions like hatred and resentment were low-level things that only mortals would be immersed in pain for. This did not mean that Longqing no longer hated Ning Ke, nor was he jealous of Yi Hongyu and Mo Shanshan. It was because he understood that all the feelings of hatred and pain were boring processes. What was more important was the result. As long as he could become strong again or even more powerful, just like the news from the West Hill Divine Palace a few days ago, he could take back everything he had lost like Yi Hongyu or even more. The Tomes of Arcane that Long Qing was reading at this time was the third of the 7 Tomes of Arcane, the Sha Hand Scroll. The reason why this Tomes of the Arcane was called Sha Hand Scroll was that there were countless cultivation methods recorded in it. Some were exquisite and hard to describe, some were the entry methods of the mountain sects, some were the Shintao of Haotian Taoism, some were the Huayan methods of the Buddhism sect, and even the most mysterious and evil methods of the Devil's Doctrine. Almost all the cultivation methods in the world were recorded in this Tome of the Arcane. Only the back of the mountain of the Academy could compete with Hao Han's collection and the quality of the cultivation methods. As for the world-renowned Qinghe County Book Collection building, it was not qualified to be compared with these two. Starlight fell on the pages, illuminating the human figures painted in thick ink. There were countless lines flowing back and forth between the figures. There were countless records of cultivation methods. Long Qing County's cultivation methods flowed at the bottom of the book. This strange cultivation method was called Grey Eye. Grey Eye was neither a Haotian Taoism cultivation method, nor a Devil's Doctrine cultivation method. Instead, it was the product of a mighty person of the Jishou Abbey killing an elder of the Devil's Doctrine, who cultivated the practice of Tao Tai many years ago. After thinking about the dangers of the battle, he pondered for 3 nights and used his vast knowledge and wisdom to transform the practice of Tao Tai. The foundation of this cultivation method was the Taoist. In essence, it was to seize other cultivators' psyche power and consciousness to strengthen oneself. However, after being transformed by Taoist law, it did not need to devour flesh and blood. Could directly seize consciousness. It did not look as bloody as before. It seemed to be more neutral and peaceful. In fact, it was evil and cruel as before. If he was still the proud and misophobic Prince Long Qing, he would not cultivate such an evil cultivation method, even if he would be tempted by great power. However, he had experienced so many things. He was once filthy weak, and had done many ugly and evil things. He was no longer the Prince Long Qing of that year, so he did not hesitate to start cultivating. The starlight was like water, cooling the courtyard of the Taoist temple. The hut was relatively dark. Long Qing looked at the Sha Hand Scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. His consciousness moved slowly with this cultivation method. His face became paler and paler. Many days ago on the South Sea, a small boat rose and fell in the waves. The sun on the sea was unusually hot. The fish had already dived into the deep sea, and the seagulls had naturally disappeared. Long Qing knelt behind the Taoist in indigo, enduring the scorching sun. However, his face did not become dark, but extremely pale. This was the depth of the South Sea. It was tens of thousands of miles away from the land, and the coastline could not be seen. The Taoist in indigo stood on the bow of the boat and watched the waves rolling. It seemed that he was watching the ebb and flow of the tide on the coast. Persistence is an obstacle, even if it is the persistence of light and darkness. The hot wooden board made Long Qing feel as if his knees were about to be scorched. However, he did not dare to move. He said in a trembling voice, "I have tried to stop persistence and go to the night in the north on the wilderness. However, even so, I still did not see the light in the night." The Taoist in indigo stood on the bow of the boat and looked at the sea with his hands behind his back. He said, "You want to find something, so you made a choice. Making a choice is a kind of persistence." Long Qing asked, "Then how can I not be persistent?" The Taoist in indigo said, "Buddhism pays attention to meditation. What we pursue is loneliness. Not being persistent means not moving your mind. If you move your mind, one will be light, the other will be darkness. How should you choose? Therefore, you don't need to choose. You just need to listen to Haotian's choice." Long Qing said, "But I am not the great divine priest of revelation. I can't feel Haotian's edict. How can I know what is Haotian's choice? How can I know that I have not made a wrong judgment?" The Taoist in indigo said, "Whatever you think is what you think." Long Qing was very confused and said, "Isn't that following one's heart?" The Taoist in indigo suddenly laughed and said indifferently, "Everything in the world is destined by Haotian. Everything is under the control of Haotian, including people's hearts. In this case, how can you really follow your heart without any rules? You follow your heart. In fact, you are following Haotian. Hearing this, Longqing felt as if the wind and snow on the wilderness were sprinkled on his head. Suddenly, the fierceness of the scorching sun was washed away. He became extremely refreshed and instantly understood many things. He bowed forward and pressed his forehead against the hot deck. His slightly trembling voice was full of desire and courage. He said loudly, "I want to become stronger." The Taoist in indigo said, "The day before yesterday, I threw you into the fire spring. With the endless warmth and mercy given by Haotian, I rebuilt the snow mountain and ocean of qi in your body. Now you can already cultivate. If you want to become stronger as soon as possible, then after you come ashore, go to the West Hill and enter that shabby abbey." Now that Longqing knew the incomparably noble identity of the Taoist in indigo, he could naturally guess that the shabby abbey he mentioned was the legendary Jishou Abbey. He could not help but be ecstatic and kowtow repeatedly. The Taoist in indigo said, "There are still 6 volumes of tomes of arcane in the abbey. When you have read them all, you may be considered powerful. However, reading is a very painful thing after all." Yisu had to stab himself with a sword to move his eyes away from the pages. With your will, you definitely can't resist the temptation of the tomes of arcane. At that time, your Taoist heart will be broken and reborn, and the pain will be indescribable. Longqing said with a determined expression, "I am not afraid of pain or bitterness." The Taoist in indigo said again, "There are thousands of disciples in Haotian Taoism, but there are only a few who have the opportunity to enter the Jishou Abbey. You are not the great divine priest of the divine hall, nor are you a disciple of the previous generation who has made great contributions to Haotian Taoism. Then you can only be a servant in the abbey. Will you dislike such an identity?" If the cultivators in the world knew that they had the opportunity to enter the Jishou Abbey to read the 7 volumes of tomes of arcane, they would be willing to go to the Jishou Abbey every day, let alone be a servant. Even the manure pond would be fragrant. Longqing naturally had the same thoughts. He said without hesitation, "I am willing to do anything for Haotian Taoism." The Taoist in indigo said, "I can feel your heart at this time, but there are some grumpy old people living in the abbey. Even I don't want to care about them. Don't be afraid when the time comes." Longqing was shocked speechless. He thought to himself, what kind of person is the Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey? Is there anyone else in the world besides the headmaster of the academy who can make him feel troubled? In the night, there were occasional sounds of insects in the Jishou Abbey. Longqing's face became paler and paler. Bean-sized beads of sweat rolled down from his forehead. His eyes became more and more dazed, and he looked extremely weak. One could imagine what kind of pain he was suffering now. Every time he opened the Sha hand scroll, he would suffer endless pain. Tonight, when he began to cultivate the gray eye, the pain became even more terrible. There seemed to be countless invisible swords on the seemingly ordinary pages, constantly stabbing his Taoist heart, trying to pierce it into a beehive. When he finished reading the last word of the gray eye technique, his Tao heart was also broken into countless pieces, and the fear and the pain of being cut by 1,000 knives directly made him faint. After a long time, Longqing woke up. During this time, the morning light had just appeared outside the window. He looked at himself in horror and found that there were no wounds on his body. His Taoist heart was still as stable as yesterday, as if the thousands of invisible swords that appeared in the tomes of arcane last night were fake. He walked out of the thatched hut in a daze and washed his face by the lake. He became slightly more awake and went to his own house to wash up. Then he started to fetch water to start a fire to cook. After he finished serving the 3 martial uncles who were serving the tianshu and finished their breakfast, he carried 2 buckets of clean water and a few boxes of things and walked towards the back of the monastery. This spring, Longqing did chores day after day in the Jishou Abbey. He cleaned the courtyard, cooked, wiped the table and ground the ink. Only late at night did he have the opportunity to read and cultivate. The days were very hard, but his mood was very peaceful. He did not have a trace of complaint. He just did it in silence and tried to read as much as possible. It was interesting to say that his biggest enemy in the world, Ningke, had basically lived such a hard and fulfilling life in the past 10 years, especially after entering the academy. He did not know if this was in accordance with the words of the youngest uncle of the academy. If fate wanted to choose someone, then there would be a lot of things that needed to be done. Longqing carried a shoulder pole and carried a suitcase. He walked out of the Taoist temple and came to the front of a cliff. During these days in the Jisho Abbey, he did not have any complaints. Even if it was unbearable pain, he was willing to endure it. However, looking at the cliff, his eyes were full of fear and an expression of wanting to escape. Under the cliff was a dense green forest, and the cliff was covered with green vines that were as thick as a finger. In the gaps of the green vines, one could faintly see that the cliff was grayish-yellow in color. One could also see that there were many caves on the cliff. The depths of the caves were unknown and revealed a sense of mystery. This cliff full of caves was very high and gave people a very majestic feeling. Standing at the foot of the mountain, Longqing was like a small ant. If someone looked down at the earth from a very high sky, he would probably think that this cliff was just an inconspicuous mound or an ant nest covered with moss. There are some things that I have to report to everyone. Today is a rest day on Saturday. This chapter is to make up for the day I took leave on the 28th of next month. Previously, I said that from the 22nd onwards, I would write 2 chapters a day until the end of the month. Some readers thought that I did not keep my promise and were very angry. They specifically told me that they would read pirated versions in the future. I did not write 2 chapters for some days, but there was one day when I wrote 12,000 and another day when I wrote 10,000. So I did some calculations. Excluding the rest day on the 25th, there are a total of 9 days from the 22nd to the end of the month. Including today's post, I wrote a total of 55,368 words, excluding nonsense and single chapters. My daily average is 6,152, which is exactly 2 chapters. It is actually very detailed because everyone has been very understanding of me. I am very grateful to everyone. However, since they said that it was because I did not fulfill my promise or because I have a problem with my character, I am a little speechless. Of course, if you insist that I should also write 2 chapters on the 25th, then I really have no way to explain it. I will continue to improve my work attitude and try to reduce the terrible typos and mistakes in the first period of time. This is really difficult. There is something wrong with my brain. I will not make any blind promises and let everyone down. I will try to ensure that the updates are continuous and contribute to everyone's leisure and entertainment, instead of making things difficult for everyone. Thank you again, and I appeal for genuine subscriptions. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 495. The lush foliage of the forest at the foot of the cliff blocked the sunlight. It was exceptionally quiet and even a little scary. Fortunately, it did not take long for Longqing to walk out of the forest. He shifted the pole on his shoulder to avoid pressing on the wounds he had suffered a few days ago. Looking at the green cliff in front of him and the vines that covered the entire rock wall, he took a deep breath and dispelled the fear in his heart. Then, he lowered his head and walked up the narrow and steep mountain path. The cliff was very steep. It was very difficult to climb with such a heavy thing. When Longqing walked to the front of a cave, he already felt that his back was so sore that it was about to break. Fortunately, there was a small stone platform about 3 or 4 steps wide at the entrance of the cave. He put down the bucket clumsily. He remembered that there was a spring in the cave, so he did not take any water. He took out a box from his bag, pulled the dense vines with his hands and walked into the cave. The cave was very low. Ordinary people could not even stand straight in the cave. Longqing walked forward silently with his back bent, looking like a real servant. However, although the cave was low and the entrance was covered by vines, it was not dark at all. Instead, it was as bright as day. That was because the walls of the cave were inlaid with glowing luminous pearls every few steps. These luminous pearls were round, flawless, and as big as chicken eggs. If they were placed in the world, they would be the most precious treasures. However, there were countless caves in the Green Mountain behind the Jisho Abbey, and there were countless of these precious luminous pearls in this cave. Moreover, the builders used these treasures as candles. Longqing had been to this cave before, so he could remain calm. After all, the first time he entered this cave, he was completely shocked by the scene in front of him and could not speak. After all, even in the imperial palace of capital Chang of the Yan Kingdom where he had lived since he was a child, there were only a few luminous pearls of this quality. The cave between the green mountain cliffs seemed simple and even miserable, but it was a different world inside. The stone walls were carved with flowers and inlaid with jade, pastel flowers and birds. The path was paved with gold bricks, and the walls were tied with silver ribbons. When he walked into the deepest cave hall, there were countless rare flowers and old paintings. It was extremely rich and complicated, even exceeding the enjoyment of emperors in the world and the limits of human imagination. It seemed vulgar, but no one dared to say it was vulgar, because other than Haotian Taoism, which ruled the whole world and had endless wealth and resources, no other power could do such a vulgar thing in the deep forest that no one knew about. There was a very large soft couch in the hall, and dozens of snowfield direwolf's fur were spread on the couch, making it look like a real snowfield. In the middle of the sea of silver-white fur sat an old man with a withered face. The wrinkles on his face were very deep, and the Taoist robe he was wearing was very old, as if it had not been changed for many years. Snowfield direwolves were very strong, and it was extremely difficult to kill one. There were so many snowfield direwolf's fur here, and it was really hard to know how strong this old Taoist was in the past. Longqing walked to the bed, knelt down and presented the box with both hands. He did not dare to look up at the old Taoist, and looked very respectful and humble, silently waiting for the old Taoist's order. Lying drunk on the skin of a snow wolf and appreciating the most precious objects in the world was a luxury that countless people in the world dreamed of. However, there was no expression on the old Taoist's skinny face. He seemed lifeless, and it could even be said that he looked like a dried corpse. The only thing that could prove that he was still alive was the occasional movement of his eyes. His eyes were filled with cruelty, and there was also endless blood red and madness. Sitting in isolation for dozens of years, even a real palace would become the most gloomy prison, let alone a cave. The horror in the old Taoist's eyes probably came from this. The reason why this old Taoist would sit in the cave for decades was naturally not because he was imprisoned. There were not many people in this world who could imprison him, and Taoism would not treat such a great figure of the previous generation like this. Other than some very obscure reasons, the most important reason was that he could not walk due to his disability. Or rather, even if he could walk due to his disability, he was not willing to appear in the world as a disabled person. The old Taoist's disability was very serious. He had no feet, no legs, and even no buttocks, as if a sharp sword had once cut him in half from the waist. So now he was only left with half of his body, sitting on the snow-white snowfield direwolf's fur, as if he was trapped in it. Being cut in half at the waist was one of the cruelest death sentences in the world. Since it was called a death sentence, it was naturally to be cut in half at the waist. Many important organs would be lost, and the blood in the body would be drained. Inevitably, one would die miserably. But this old Taoist who was cut in half at the waist survived, and he lived for many years. Of course, he lived a very painful life, and he just lived. Oh! When Longqing entered the cave for the first time and saw the old Taoist who only had half of his body left, he was extremely shocked. He could not figure out how the old Taoist had survived. Later, he knew that the old Taoist had only drunk the spring water in the cave for dozens of years, and did not eat any food. In this way, he completely abandoned the lower half of his body. Of course, the human body would still produce some waste. He thought that the old Taoist must have used his terrifying cultivation to forcibly evaporate these waste from the surface of the skin along with the body fluid. This speculation shocked him even more. Human beings needed to eat grains to survive. This was the rule set by Haotian, and it could not be violated. Even if the grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state could not eat for dozens of years. According to the records of the West Hill, only the legendary sages who had surpassed the 5 states could be purified by Tianqi and become divine bodies. In this way, they could collect the qi of heaven and earth and live by drinking dew. In this case, could it be that the withered Taoist who had been cut in half at the waist was so terrifying that he had already crossed the threshold of the 5 states of cultivation decades ago? Longqing could not prove his speculation, but if it was correct, Then the withered Taoist on the soft couch in the snow sea would be the first sage he had met in the world. Of course, he did not know how high the cultivation state of the Abbey Dean on the boat in the South Sea was. Therefore, after entering the cave, he knelt in front of the soft couch, looking extremely humble. He could not hide the awe and even fear in his heart for the old Taoist. Then these emotions all turned into some kind of desire, the desire for the unknown end of the cultivation road, the desire for power. He thought he finally understood why the Abbey Dean sent him to the Jisho Abbey to be a servant. Only as a servant could he come to the Green Mountain Cave and meet a person like the old Taoist who stood at the top of the cultivation world. However, the development of things did not completely conform to Longqing's beautiful imagination. The old Taoist, who looked like a mummy, looked expressionlessly at him who knelt in front of the couch. His lips moved slowly, and his hoarse voice sounded like two hot stones rubbing against each other in the desert at noon. It was extremely unpleasant to hear. "You are too weak." Longqing did not hear the words clearly. He raised his head subconsciously, but met the eyes of the old Taoist on the couch, which were filled with madness and violence. When he met the old Taoist's gaze, he only felt that his consciousness was suddenly pulled into a terrifying sea of blood, and he groaned in pain. "You are too weak. You are a good-for-nothing." The old Taoist spread out his trembling hands and tightly clutched his skinny throat, as if he wanted to struggle to death. His voice was forced out from between his fingers, full of disappointment and even despair. "You are a good-for-nothing. What qualifications do you have to enter the Jisho Abbey? What qualifications do you have to talk to me? You are just nonsense. I am also a good-for-nothing. The people hiding in this mountain are all a bunch of King good-for-nothings." The old Taoist moved angrily among the snow-white fur. With only half of his body left, he looked particularly funny and tragic when he moved, like a worm wriggling. His shrill cry echoed in the cave, and an indescribably terrifying aura instantly filled the entire space, oppressing everything that could be touched. The green vines suddenly became chaotic, and Longqing flew out of the cave with blood spurting from his mouth. He fell heavily on the edge of the stone platform and almost fell down. He looked at the dark cave entrance and thought of the terrifying aura that he had felt earlier. His eyes were filled with shock and fear. He knew that the old Taoist did not want to kill him, but his aura had naturally leaked out due to his anger. However, even so, it already had such a strong power. If the old Taoist really used his full cultivation, no one in the world would be able to resist him. Longqing panted for a moment, and gradually calmed down. He wiped the blood from his lips, put the carrying pole on his shoulder, carried his bag and continued to walk up the cliff. There were many caves in this green mountain, and many seniors of Haotian Taoism lived in them. These seniors of Haotian Taoism were in different states, but they were all extremely powerful figures. However, like the old Taoists, they had suffered extremely serious injuries and were disabled, so they all had bad tempers. Who was it that could seriously injure so many seniors of Haotian Taoism? After all, some of these seniors of Haotian Taoism had surpassed the 5 states decades ago. Didn't that mean that the person who injured them had a higher cultivation state, and it was not just 1 or 2 levels higher? Longqing could vaguely see the answer to this question, but he did not want to continue thinking about it, because the tomes of arcane in the temple and the green mountain behind the temple were all his hopes. He silently walked between the cliffs of the Green Mountain, going in and out of those mysterious caves. He was like a busy worker walking in an ant's nest, and had no time to care about what spring looked like. Chang'an City. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had dinner in the Grand Secretary's mansion. After dinner, Mrs. Zeng and Sang Sang went to talk, while Grand Secretary Zhengjing talked with Ning Ke in the study for a long time. It was a little late when they left the mansion. Seeing that there were few people on the street, Ning Ke decided to spend the night at the old brush pen shop with Sang Sang. The old brush pen shop was as usual. The bedroom in the backyard was fully prepared. Sang Sang boiled water, and after they washed up, they went to bed and prepared to sleep. It was in the thick of spring, and the night wind was not cold. In fact, there was a hint of dryness. A wild cat was lying on the wall of the courtyard, looking at the stars in the night sky. It let out a shrill cry that sounded like a baby's cry. The sound was a little unpleasant, and Ning Ke could not sleep at all. He opened his eyes and looked at the beam above his head. He suddenly said, "Do you know? Yi Hongyu killed the great divine priest of judgment." Sang Sang said softly, "I don't know." Ning Ke found that she was not as shocked as he was when he heard the news. He could not help but laugh at himself, thinking that Sang Sang was indeed not a mortal like him. He said, "I heard that after killing the great divine priest, she immediately injured Luo Kadi. If it were not for the hierarch's order, she would have killed that person." Sang Sang softly agreed. Ning Ke said, "I thought I had already caught up with her. Who would have thought that she would leave me so far behind? She is now the great divine priest of West Hill. If we fight in the future, I can't beat her, and I can't use your identity as the great divine priest of light to suppress her. What should I do?" Sang Sang said, "Then don't fight." Ning Ke suddenly said after a moment of silence, "Your father said that if I let you follow me to Lang Temple, it would be a long journey, and it would be wrong to use the identity of a handmaiden. He wants us to get engaged first. What do you think we should do?" Sang Sang asked in a low voice. "What do you think we should do?" Ning Ke said, "Then get engaged." Song Song's voice sounded from under the thin quilt. It was a little humming as if she had a cold. "Okay." Ning Ke said, "Come to sleep, I'm a little hot." Sang Sang moved over from the other side of the bed and got into his arms. Every year when it was hot in late spring, Ning Ke liked to sleep with her in his arms. Because she was born with a cold body, holding her was like holding a cold jade, a soft cold jade. Tonight was the same. Song Song's body was still so cold, but she felt very hot herself. Ning Ke also felt a little hot. Listening to the mournful cries of the wild cats on the wall, he became more and more annoyed. He scolded in a low voice, "Spring is almost over, why are you still crying? I wish everyone a pleasant work tomorrow." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 496. Not long ago, in the study of the Grand Secretary's mansion, Ning Ke and Zhang Jing had a conversation like this. At that time, Zhang Jing drank half a cup of tea and kept silent for another 5 minutes. Then he suddenly said, "I heard from Sang Sang that you are going to leave in a few days." Ning Ke nodded and said, "The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival is in autumn and the Lang Temple is a little far. If you want to go, you have to leave soon or you will miss the time." Last spring, the Lang Temple had sent the invitation to the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival to Chang'an City. Monk Guanhai had personally handed it to Ning Quebec. However, Ning Ke did not plan to go because of some considerations. However, his idea was not approved by the academy. Zhang Jing said, "It is a long journey, so we should go together. But Sang Sang is my daughter and the successor of the great divine priest of light in West Hill. She can't follow you as a handmaiden like she did in the past. Have you thought about this?" Ning Ke had not thought about this problem. He said, "Then what do you mean?" Zhang Jing looked into his eyes and asked, "How old is Sang Sang this year?" Ning Ke counted the days and said, 16. Zhang Jing said firmly, "Since she is 16, what are you waiting for? Hurry up and get married. It will be more convenient for us to get along on the journey as husband and wife, and the Grand Secretary's mansion will not be laughed at." Ning Ke said helplessly, "Are you in a hurry? We only have a few days to prepare." Zhang Jing looked into his eyes and said, "You two have been together for 16 years. How can you be in a hurry? But marriage cannot be neglected. How about you get engaged first?" It was a simple conversation, but Ning Ke could not resist in front of a father who cared about his daughter. He agreed in a daze. Under the starlight outside the window, Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang in his arms. He saw her gradually relaxed brows and saw the smile on her dark face. He could not help but smile as well. They would get married one day. Why should he be afraid of getting engaged? But when he dug out the dying baby from the pile of corpses 16 years ago, he did not expect that she would one day become a girl and become his wife. Thinking of these trivial things, Ning Ke gradually fell asleep. For ordinary people, falling asleep was the consent of falling asleep. But this was not applicable to Ning Quebec. Because he had lived on the edge of life and death since he was a child, energy and time were very precious. Therefore, he had always fallen asleep very quickly and deeply. It did not take long for him to feel refreshed. This situation continued until he began to cultivate. That year, he brought Sang Sang to the market and bought a record of the highest enlightenment. After returning to the small courtyard in the city of Wei, he began to cultivate according to the method written in the book and tried to meditate. It was also that night that he had a very warm dream. He dreamed of an ocean. After that, he began to dream one after another. They were usually warm dreams after meditation, but those dreams did not have any specific content, nor were there any vivid scenes. Until the spring 3 years ago, when he left the city of Wei with Princess Liu for Chang'an. During the journey he had a conversation with Liu Qingchen, and had a strange dream while hugging Song Song's little foot in the middle of the night. In that dream he stood on the cold and dark wilderness. He saw the cavalry of the Tang Empire, the warriors of the Yueluan Kingdom, the crossbowmen of the South Jin Kingdom, the barbarians on the grassland, the countless corpses that dyed the wilderness red, and the 3 black clouds of dust in front of the wilderness. He saw the sky gradually occupied by darkness. People looked in the direction of darkness with fear, and a tall man beside him said that it was going to be dark. After killing the tea master Yan Suqing, Ning Ke fled on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The blood on his body and the big black umbrella alarmed the divine talisman. In that early morning, his blocked snow mountain was rebuilt, and he finally set foot on the road of cultivation. It was also at that time that he had another dream. In that dream he returned to the cold and dark wilderness. The night was still invading the sky, so he looked up at the sky, while countless people around him did not look up at the sky, but just looked at him coldly, vigilantly and sadly. At this time a sudden thunder sounded in the sky, and a light door slowly opened. Light came to the world again, and a huge golden dragon indifferently stretched out its head, looking down at the people on the ground. In the exam to enter the 2nd floor of the academy, Ning Ke once again entered the dream where reality and illusion could not be distinguished when he climbed the rock on the peak. The night was still invading the wilderness, and the light was hidden behind the clouds, becoming brighter and brighter. People in the wilderness were still looking at him, including the housekeeper and the young master whom he had killed many years ago. The tall man asked him what choice he would make, and he said he did not want to choose. The tall man asked him what if he had to choose. At the end of the dream, Ning Ke killed the housekeeper and the young master again, and then walked into the night with the knife on his back. Ning Ke looked at the 3 black smoke and felt the coldness coming from them, and his body became very stiff. He knew that he was dreaming, but he did not know how to wake up from the dream. The night was getting colder, and the light was getting brighter and brighter, dividing the whole sky into 2 halves. The huge dragon head looked down at the people on the ground mercilessly, and slowly opened its mouth. The soldiers in the wilderness were still fighting with each other, but it was hard to tell who was fighting with whom. Countless corpses were soaked in blood. He looked at the tall man beside him, and looked at the white hair on his shoulders. His heart beat faster and faster, as if the broken war drums in the wilderness could explode at any time. Because this time he finally confirmed that the tall man in the wilderness in the dream was the headmaster of the academy. The headmaster of the academy did not turn around, but looked at the sky quietly, watching the battle between the light and the darkness. However, Ning Ke was very clear that the headmaster of the academy was waiting for him to make a choice. He did not want to make a choice. To be more precise, he was able to make a choice last time because he was ignorant. Now he vaguely understood something, so he was not as fearless as before. What confused him the most was why the headmaster of the academy wanted him to make a choice. Ning Ke wanted to escape this dream, this blood-stained wilderness, so he turned and ran towards the periphery of the wilderness. He ran faster and faster, and his heart beat faster and faster. His breathing became more and more rapid, and his face became paler and paler. Then he ran into a white sea, a sea full of white lotus flowers. The sea was no longer warm and it was very cold. The white lotus petals were frozen into ice sculptures, and then scattered into pieces of jade, sinking into the sea. His body sank to the bottom of the sea, and entered the layer of blood that was thick like blood. The blood made it difficult for him to breathe. No, he could not breathe. He began to struggle with all his might, trying to escape, but he found that his hands and feet could no longer move, and struggling would only make him sink deeper. Ninkei opened his eyes and woke up. He was panting heavily, and his body was covered in cold sweat. His eyes were full of fear, and he looked like a dead man. He looked at the paper pasted on the roof, and after a long time, he finally confirmed that he had left the dream and returned to the old brush pen shop. These dreams were his biggest secret. He did not tell Chun Pippi, the headmaster of academy, or other senior brothers and sisters. Although these dreams were full of the truth that he wanted to find out, he did not dare to tell anyone, because he always felt that these dreams were hiding something terrible. 16 years ago, the West Hill Divine Palace, and now the Buddhism sect were all guessing whether he was the son of Yama. Ninkei used to think that these were complete nonsense. However, every time he thought of what Wei Guangming said when he returned to Chang, and from the wilderness, he felt extremely terrified. If the legendary son of Yama referred to a time traveler from another world, then wouldn't it be him? The dark night came and the underworld invasion. Although it was only a legend, it was a legend that made cultivators in the world vigilant and uneasy for thousands of years. He did not know the specific details, but he knew that this must be a major event that involved the destruction of the world. If he was really the son of Yama, then what would he face? No matter how tolerant the headmaster of academy was, and how he did not even care about youngest uncle and him joining the devil, he would definitely not ignore this matter. Otherwise, why would there be a tall figure in his dream? No matter how peaceful and warm the back of the mountain of the academy was, it would not be soft-hearted in the face of such a big problem. If he was the son of Yama, eldest brother did not know what he would do, but second brother would definitely take off the ancient crown and beat him to death, and then jump off the cliff to show their friendship. If he fell into the hands of the West Hill Divine Palace, he would definitely be tied to the stake and burned to ashes. If he fell into the hands of the Buddhism sect, would the monks shave his head and let him recite sutras in the Xiankong temple for the rest of his life? In this case, the best ending was to become a monk. Ninkei leaned against the headboard and thought about these things. His clothes, which were soaked in cold sweat, became dry and wet again, and his face became paler and paler. He could not imagine what he would face in the world if he was really the son of Yama. At that time, the whole world would probably abandon him, and he would be the only one left to wander in the world, living a miserable life and avoiding the divine light of Haotian like a mouse. At this moment, Sang Sang moved in his arms and frowned slightly, as if she had dreamed of something bad, or felt Ninkei's mood at this time. Ninkei looked at her slightly dark face and gradually calmed down. Because no matter whether he became a traitor or said that he was the son of Yama, there would always be a little handmaiden who would not leave him. Even if he wandered in the world again, he would not wander alone in the world but two people. This was good. He lowered his head and kissed between her eyebrows, trying to kiss away the frown there. However, Sang Sang seemed to feel uncomfortable, and her eyebrows were knitted tighter and tighter. Ninkei suddenly felt that something was wrong. Song Song's face became paler and paler, and it was as frightening as snow. Her tightly knitted eyebrows seemed to be in great pain, and her body became colder and colder. Ninkei was shocked and hurriedly shook her to wake her up. Sang Sang opened her eyes with difficulty and looked extremely weak. A bone-piercing chill came from her clothes, and Ninkei could not help but shiver. Sang Sang trembled in pain and clutched Ninkei's clothes tightly. She wanted to say something, but could not say anything. Ninkei did not dare to delay. He got up and blew a loud whistle. He pulled a thick quilt to wrap her body, held her in his arms and rushed out. He kicked open the wooden door of the old brush pen shop and ran to Lin 47th Street. It was not dawn and it was the darkest. Ninkei looked at the entrance of the alley and shouted angrily, "You pig! Why are you so slow?" The big black horse was suddenly awakened by the whistle. It was about to express its dissatisfaction when it saw Ninkei's livid face and immediately knew that something serious had happened. Ninkei was in a very bad mood at this time, and he might really kill it at any time. It hurriedly kicked its four hooves and dragged the heavy carriage to the old brush pen shop. Ninkei jumped on the carriage and said while gasping, "To the academy. I have good news for everyone. The main plot of the third volume is basically finished, and I will go through it again tonight. P.S. There are so many typos that I want to kill myself." I'm really in a bad state, so I have to revise it. 2012090500023. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 497. The black horse carriage flew through the eastern city and forced open the Vermilion Bird City gate with 2 waste tokens. It ran along the straight official road to the academy in the south. Inside the carriage, Ning Ke held Sang Sang tightly, his right hand fumbling in the carriage wall, and kept gasping. He was in good health, and his breath became longer after cultivating the Great Spirit. He gasped not because of fatigue or hard work, but because he could feel Song Song's body getting colder and colder through the thick quilt. Finally, he found the small wine pot he had prepared before. Without any hesitation, he unscrewed the lid with his trembling fingers and handed it to Song Song's lips. A strong smell of wine filled the carriage. Sang Sang closed her eyes tightly, and her sparse eyelashes trembled slightly. Her face was pale, and her slightly gray lips were tightly pressed together. She clenched her teeth so hard that the liquor Ning Ke poured from the flagon could not enter her mouth at all. It dripped down from the corner of her lips and wet the bedding. Ning Ke looked at the dripping liquor in her weak face, and his body and mind were occupied by fear. He was so scared that he lowered his head in pain and held her tighter. Sang Sang had not fallen ill for a long time. To be more precise, she had not fallen ill since she left the city of Wei and came to Chang'an. But today, she was so sick that it was more terrible than any illness in Ning Ke's memory. So he was very scared and made a decision immediately. He did not carry her to the clinic, but boarded the horse carriage and rushed to the academy in the south of the city. There were no doctors in the academy, but there were teachers and senior brothers in the academy. Ning Ke believed that as long as Sang Sang was still breathing, she would be fine. It turned out that Ning Ke's judgment was correct. He ran into the clouds with Sang Sang in his arms and came to the cliff plateau at the back of the mountain of the academy. He shouted towards the lake. His senior brothers and sisters who were still asleep suddenly woke up and came out to greet him. Seventh sister was at the front. She was embroidering a picture of a butterfly cat before going to bed and didn't go to sleep until late at night. There was still an embroidery needle in her hair bun, and her face was still full of tiredness and annoyance for being woken up. When she saw Ning Ke's terrified expression and Sang Sang in his arms, she immediately understood what had happened. The tiredness and anger on her face turned into seriousness. She didn't ask Ning Ke anything. She just looked at Song Song's pale face, took out the embroidery needle from her hair bun, and stabbed Song Song's neck 4 times as fast as lightning. The needle fell into the wind. Sang Sang grunted softly, still frowning and not waking up. However, the pale color on her face faded a little, and the original light black color reappeared. Senior sister. How is it? Ning Ke looked at seventh sister and asked in a trembling voice. He didn't know that senior sister could also use acupuncture to treat people in addition to tactical arrays and embroidery. But looking at Song Song's change, he suddenly had a lot of hope. The chill is attacking the heart. It's a little dangerous. I can only use needles to suppress it for now, said the seventh senior sister. Ning Ke's arrival had awakened everyone by the lake at the back of the mountain of the academy. Eldest brother also appeared in the distance, but his movements were still so slow, as if nothing could make him feel anxious or anxious. The seventh senior sister looked at eldest brother and seemed to think of something. She became a lot more relaxed and shouted, "Senior brother, drag 11th brother from the mountain, but hurry up." Eldest brother was startled and turned back to the forest behind him. The seventh senior sister looked at Ning Ke's anxious expression and comforted him. "It's not a big problem. You take Sang Sang to the straw hut first. Teacher is there and nothing will happen. Just wait for 11th brother." Ning Ke didn't understand the meaning of the senior sister's words. If teacher was willing to help, Sang Sang would naturally be fine. But why did she have to wait for 11th brother? The morning light gradually shrouded the back of the mountain of the academy. It fell on the golden and jade-like grass on the eaves of the straw hut, and then reflected to the forest further away. The meadow surrounded by flowers and trees was bright. Ning Ke, Chun Pippi and others stood outside the straw hut, waiting for the news inside. Since last spring, Sang Sang often went to the back of the mountain of the academy. With her good cooking and quiet temperament, she won everyone's love and pity. At this time, knowing that she was seriously ill, the disciples of the academy couldn't help but be very worried. Tang Xiaotang was so anxious that her eyes even turned red. However, Ning Ke was much calmer than before. Because teacher had already woken up and was in the straw hut at this time. He believed that even if Sang Sang had one foot in the underworld, teacher would be able to pull her back. At this moment Wang Qi walked out of the hut. Ning Ke hurried forward. Wang Qi looked at him and said, "She was born with a weak body and has been suffering from coldness for many years. Every time this disease breaks out it gets more serious. The longer it stays hidden and suppressed, the more serious the disease will be. I checked her pulse and confirmed that she suffered from a severe cold some time ago. Recently she has been overthinking. That's why she is like this now." Ning Ke asked, "Will she be okay?" Wang Qi said, "Seventh sister pressed her pulse with golden needles in time. I decocted a medicine for her, and it should be able to slightly reduce the cold. It's not a big deal. Just pay attention to keep warm in the future, and don't dare to catch a cold." Hearing this, Ning Ke suddenly relaxed, and suddenly felt that his legs were a little weak. Wang Qi suddenly thought of something and looked at him confusedly and asked, "Youngest brother, Song Song's disease came from her mother's womb, and it must have broken out many times in the past years. There are no good doctors in the city of Wei, and only a group of quacks in Chang'an. How did you manage to keep her alive until now?" When Sang Sang was young, Ning Ke often took her to see a doctor. The money that he had painstakingly saved was basically spent on the medicine shop, but it was of no use. Later, he found a way to help Sang Sang survive until today. Hearing his senior brother's question, he did not dare to hide anything and answered honestly, "Later, every time Sang Sang got sick, I would make her drink a big bag of liquor." Second brother had been standing silently outside the hut without any expression on his face. At this time, when he heard that Ning Ke had been treating Sang Sang with liquor all these years, he suddenly frowned and looked extremely unhappy. Wang Qi thought for a moment and nodded. This is indeed a good way. Although the pulse warming with liquor can only temporarily treat the symptoms, it is much cleaner than those rotten medicines. Fortunately, there was such an evaluation or second brother would never spare Ning Quebec watching Wang Qi's figure disappear in the flowers. Ning Ke only today knew that 11th brother, who loved to talk about the flower addict, turned out to be a divine doctor. Thinking of the flower addict with a head full of petals when he first entered the back mountain, Ning Ke could not help but feel a little worried and asked, "Is 11th brother reliable?" 7th sister said, 11th brother has spent his whole life on flowers and plants. How can he be compared to Lu Changjia, the flower addict, who only loves the appearance but doesn't know the soul? He can recognize all the flowers and plants in the world, and he is proficient in all kinds of herbal medicine. He is the most reliable doctor. Hearing this, Ning Ke finally felt relieved, but not completely. In his opinion, the most reliable person in the world was of course his teacher, and he had to listen to what his teacher had to say. The hut was open on all sides, and only a few screens were placed on the platform. There was a big couch inside, which was the residence of the headmaster of academy. At this time Sang Sang was lying on it. Sang Sang had woken up for a while, but now she fell asleep again under the effect of the medicine. Tang Xiaotang put the medicine bowl aside and wet the towel with boiling water. She wrung it until it was half wet, and then carefully placed it on her still cold forehead. Then she held her little hand and whispered something. Looking at this scene through the screen, Ning Ke felt very grateful. Then he looked back at the headmaster of academy and asked worriedly, "Teacher, you see, is she all right?" The headmaster of academy got up much earlier than usual today, so he was in a bad mood. However, he thought that Ning Ke's mood must be even worse, so he refrained from scolding him. He held a bowl of lotus seed porridge and blew on it, saying, "What can happen? She'll be fine as long as she basks in the sun." These words seemed very irresponsible, but Ning Ke was really relieved. Since the headmaster of academy said that she was fine, then Sang Sang must be fine. But would basking in the sun help? He walked to the headmaster of academy, took the bowl of lotus seed porridge, and stirred it carefully with a spoon. He asked with unprecedented respect. Teacher Song Song's body. Didn't you say that she was fine last time? The headmaster of academy said. She was born with a weak and cold body, and has not received proper treatment for all these years. No one knows how much cold aura has accumulated in her internal organs and bone marrow. Fortunately, she had the lucky chance to become Wei Guangming's disciple, and was able to obtain Wei Guangming's divine light. Naturally, she can suppress the cold aura. As time passes, the divine light in her body will be able to turn the cold aura into nothingness. I told you that she was fine that day, so she is fine. Are you questioning me? After confirming that the lotus seed porridge was cold, Ning Ke respectfully handed it over and said humbly, Teacher, your words are a slap in my face. I just don't understand what is going on. The headmaster of academy looked at him and said sarcastically, You have to ask yourself what is going on. She was originally a sickly little girl, but she was brought by your heartless master to fight with Xiaohou. Is Xiaohou so easy to kill? In order to help you, she shone brightly on the cliff that night and used up all the divine light in an instant. The cold aura in her body had been suppressed for many days, and suddenly regained its freedom. Naturally, she would find an opportunity to rebel. I don't know how you bullied her recently, making her lose her composure, which is rarely seen. That's why she is in danger today. Ning Ke was silent, thinking that it was all his fault. But Sang Sang was quiet and even a little dull. Something that could make her lose her composure. Could it be an engagement? Teacher, since she is born with a weak and cold body, how can we get rid of the root cause? The headmaster of academy took a sip of the lotus seed porridge and nodded with satisfaction. He said, as I said before, it is very simple to cure her. Bask in the sun and practice the divine skill. When you master the divine skill, the little girl will recover naturally. Ning Ke thought of the long journey and asked tentatively, It is a long way to the Lang temple. She is weak now, can I not go? The headmaster of academy was furious and scolded. Which family are you from? Can't you walk without the little handmaiden's service? Even if she needs to recuperate, you can go yourself. Besides, the Buddhism sect has its own set of skills. I admire the little monk's medical skills in the Lang temple. Are you going or not? Ning Ke said helplessly, I'll go. Teacher, why are you so angry? The conversation between the headmaster of academy and Ning Ke had already made the disciples in the hut want to laugh. When they heard Ning Ke's last sentence, they finally could not help but laugh out loud. Eldest brother did not laugh. He looked at Sang Sang on the couch, his face full of worry and pity. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 498. There was a dormitory at the back of the academy's mountain. Sang Sang was seriously ill, so he naturally stayed. It didn't take long for Sang Sang to wake up. Although she was still weak, at least she was not as scary as last night. Ning Ke told jokes and hummed a tune like when they were young to coax her to rest. Seeing that he was really tired, Tang Xiaotang began to take care of him and asked him to rest outside. It was almost dusk, and the warm sunset shrouded the back of the mountain. Ning Ke walked out of the courtyard and saw Chun Pippi standing by the lake, pretending to be lonely. He was startled and asked, What's wrong? Chun Pippi looked at the water grass and the tens of thousands of gold coins on the surface of the lake. His round and cute face was full of loneliness. He said, I'm a little touched to see you and Sang Sang so close. Ning Ke's heart skipped a beat. He wondered if he and Tang Xiaotang were quarreling again. He patted his shoulder and comforted him. Senior brother, you don't have to compare this with me. Chun Pippi explained seriously. Tang Tang and I are not like what you think. Ning Ke thought that Tang Tang could even call him such a nauseating title. What else was there to explain? He couldn't help mocking. Don't you think it's the most disgusting thing in the world for a man to deny it? Chun Pippi turned to look at him and said sincerely, We are just holding hands. Ning Ke said sarcastically, She is just a little girl. What do you want to do to her? Chun Pippi said with slight annoyance, She is about the same age as Sang Sang. Ning Ke was a little embarrassed and kept silent. The soil by the lake looked like golden Kila under the sunset. Chan Pippi lowered his head and gently turned his heels, leaving a few golden prints on the soles. After a long silence he said, Tang Tang and I are not like you and Sang Sang. We have not experienced life and death together, nor have we had time to help each other. But we are very close. I feel sorry for her when I see her jump into the waterfall, and I feel happy when I take her to Chong and… Ning Ke didn't want to be a relationship expert, so he asked directly, what are you trying to say? Chun Pippi looked up at him and said seriously, Sang Sang is very sick today. You must be very scared, right? Ning Ke thought for a while and said, yes, I can't imagine life without her. Chun Pippi said, me too. I can't imagine the days without Tang Tang by my side, so I've decided to go back to Jisho Abbey. Ning Ke did not know what to say. 2 years ago, when Chun Pippi denied that he was the illegitimate son of the West Hill hierarch, Ning Ke had vaguely guessed this guy's identity. However, he had only confirmed it today. According to the previous context, he wanted to return to the Jisho Abbey to lay his cards on the table about Tang Xiaotang. Chun Pippi said, there is a saying among the people that an ugly daughter-in-law has to see her in-laws. My mother died a long time ago, but my father is still alive. Tang Tang is not ugly, but in my father's eyes, people from the devil's doctrine are definitely not good-looking. To solve this problem, I have to go back after all. Ning Ke frowned slightly and said, have you ever thought that you might not be able to come back after returning to the Jisho Abbey? What about Tang Xiaotang? Chun Pippi looked at him and said sincerely, younger brother, you are my best friend in Chang'an City. If I really can't come back, please help me take care of Tang Tang. Ning Ke refused without hesitation and said, senior brother, don't try to trap me with such words. After all, you have to take care of your little wife by yourself. Don't count on me. Hearing this, Chun Pippi was furious and scolded, how can you be a younger brother? Besides, as long as the headmaster says something, will I really not come back for the rest of my life? Ning Ke thought for a while and said, no matter what, you have to wait for me to come back from the Lang Temple. Then we can discuss it. In my opinion, let the headmaster preside over the wedding for you. There is no need to return to the Jisho Abbey. The headmaster of the academy looked very unreliable, but his words were still so reliable. In fact, 11th brother's medicine was really good. At night, Song Song's body temperature returned to normal, and she was much more energetic. She leaned on the bed and whispered to Tang Xiaotang. Ning Ke sat by the desk and looked at the first exploration of the Great Spirit in the light of the oil lamp. He always felt a little flustered and could not help but glance at the bed. He looked at Tang Xiaotang's beautiful but childish face and thought of what Chun Pippi had said before. He could not help but feel a little sorry for her. The spring night breeze blew gently and the oil lamp swayed slightly, making his face look a little uncertain. He thought of the strange dream he had last night, Song Song's illness, and what the headmaster had said in the hut during the day. Suddenly he felt a little moved. He asked Tang Xiaotang to take care of Sang Sang and walked out of the small courtyard. After leaving the mirror lake, he passed through the forest, bypassed the waterfall, and walked out of the narrow gorge. He came to the back of the mountain of the academy, between the precipices in front of the sea of clouds. It was already late at night and the surroundings were quiet. Only the roar of the waterfall between the precipices kept echoing. Accompanied by the sound of the waterfall, he walked up the steep stone path. It took him a long time to walk to the cliff cave that had imprisoned him for a whole spring. The roofed corridor built by senior brothers had withstood the wind and rain for a year, and was no longer as new as before. The wisteria fruits in the corridor fluttered in the night wind like bells. Ning Ke walked over and saw the headmaster of the academy. The headmaster of the academy sat on the edge of the precipice. In his left hand was a delicate food box with a few pieces of beef. In his right hand was a yellow clay wine pot with clear old wine. He looked at Chong and city in the distance under the night sky and looked at the lights of tens of thousands of families. No one knew what he was thinking. Ning Ke walked behind the headmaster of the academy and bowed to him. He remembered that night in late spring last year. Also on the edge of the precipice, he once had a long conversation with his teacher. The headmaster of the academy knew that it was him behind him, and seemed to know what he was thinking. He raised his hand and waved, gesturing for Ning-Kei to sit beside him. Then he said, "You can tell me when you want to." Ning-Kei wanted to ask the headmaster of the academy many questions. However, looking at the tall figure on the edge of the precipice, he naturally thought of the figure in his dream. So he hesitated for a long time and still did not speak. Living in the Tang Empire was a very happy thing. Living in Chong'an, the capital of the Tang Empire, was the happiest thing. His days in the academy had brought him a happiness that he had never experienced in his life, so he did not know what to say. He was afraid that once he revealed those things, he would lose these happiness. The headmaster of the academy picked up a piece of beef with bright tendons and put it into his mouth. He slowly chewed for a while with an intoxicated expression on his face. When the fragrance of the meat completely melted in his mouth, he praised, "There is wine and meat, a life without worries." After saying this, he picked up the small pot of wine and took a sip. Sitting beside the headmaster of the academy, Ning-Kei picked up a piece of beef with his hand and threw it into his mouth. He frowned because he felt that the beef was too bland. However, he soon realized that he was wrong. This seemingly bland and tasteless piece of beef became more and more fragrant in his mouth as he chewed. After the tendons were cut by his teeth, they released a wonderful mixture of elasticity and velvety texture. The unique taste of the beef gradually moistened his mouth and tongue. "Good." He was extremely shocked and said, "Teacher, this is good wine and meat." The headmaster of the academy took out a small round iron wine pot from the side of the food box and threw it to him. He said with a smile, "Don't try to ask for wine in other ways. This wine is ordinary, but the beef is extremely tasteless. There is a pot and a stove in the cliff building. I can braise the whitewater beef. The best thing is that Old Yellow can't climb here to top me." Ning-Kei knew that the Old Yellow mentioned by the headmaster was the Old Yellow Bull. It was really embarrassing to eat its own kind in front of the bull. Suddenly, he found that the small round wine pot in his hand was a little familiar. He looked carefully and saw that the surface of the wine pot was engraved with flat lines. Wasn't it the small iron pot that he used to blow up Xiaoho? Don't look at me like that. I just think that this small iron pot is more suitable to hold wine. Of course, to prevent the iron from staining the wine, I painted something on the wall of the pot. The headmaster of the academy brought the yellow wine pot to his lips and took a sip. He said, "A knife can be used to kill people, but it can also be used to cut vegetables. It depends on your choice. A person's mouth can be used to eat meat and drink wine, but it can also be used to speak and ask questions. It all depends on your choice. But there is no right or wrong." How could Ning-Kei not understand what the headmaster of the academy said? After a moment of silence, he said, "Teacher, I have been having a dream these years. The story in the dream seems to be developing step by step." The headmaster of the academy asked, "Why do you ask me?" Ning-Kei said, "Because you are in the dream." The headmaster of the academy said with a smile, "I am not Sang-Sang. Why do you have to dream about me?" Ning-Kei said angrily, "Teacher, I am talking about these things very seriously. Can you stop joking?" The headmaster of the academy looked at him with a smile and said, "Then continue with your dream." Looking at the headmaster of the academy's eyes, which seemed to be able to see through everything in the world, Ning-Kei felt a little nervous. He said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Teacher, you should know about those dreams. Last year, tonight at this cliff when we talked about the underworld invasion, you once asked me which direction the underworld was in my dream." The headmaster of the academy looked at his youngest student quietly and said, "This question is still valid now." Ning-Kei said, "The darkness I saw came from the north." The headmaster of the academy said with a smile, "In that case, it is consistent with what I have learned from my travels over the years." Ning-Kei asked, "What is the underworld invasion and the darkness coming? Last year, you only talked about these stories and legends, but you did not mention the details." Details? When the whole world is shrouded in darkness, no one can see the details. When the whole civilization is lost, even if there are details, they will not be able to be passed down. The headmaster of the academy looked at the darkness above the cliff and the stars. He said, "It is said that night and day alternated in this world. Sometimes it was light for tens of thousands of years, and sometimes it was darkness for tens of thousands of years. The war between light and darkness ran through the whole history. When Haotian won, it was the world of light today. When Yama won, it was the underworld invasion. When the underworld invasion, there will be no sun in the day and no stars in the night. The world will become extremely cold. The creatures on the earth can only rely on geothermal heat to keep warm. At that time, volcanoes, hot springs, and the heat flow in the South Sea will become the most precious resources. Countless wars will take place there. The war will not last for too long. Most people will die because of hunger, cold, and desperate killing. You must know that it will be an unimaginably cold and realistic world. And after a few decades, the whole earth will become extremely quiet, as if it will never wake up from a deep sleep. Only the strongest and most determined people, whether humans or beasts, can survive. These cold and dark ages are called the Dharma ending age by the Buddhism sect, and the Taoism sect calls them Yama's advent. The headmaster of the academy said, and I am used to calling it the everlasting night. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 499. Ning Ke looked at the steep cliff under his feet and the beautiful waterfall under the starlight. He imagined the countless nights without starlight and could not help but feel a little cold. He looked at the headmaster and said, if the underworld invasion happened many times in history, the alternation between the everlasting night and the everlasting day had happened many times. However, the human race did not go extinct. It could only mean that, like what you said earlier, some of the strongest and most determined people survived the long night. I just don't understand. Those who could survive the long night must have gone through a natural selection. The remaining people must be the most powerful cultivators. But why don't these people exist in the West Hill scriptures or the stories of the Buddhism sect? The headmaster said, you should have seen the stone statues of the venerables in the Wanyan Tower Temple. The venerables of the Buddhism sect are equivalent to the sages recorded in the Haotian Taoism scriptures. In the legends, these humans have almost infinite lifespans and extremely determined wills. That is why they have successfully survived the everlasting night and waited for the day when Haotian won again. Ning Ke only learned about these powerful beings that had long been forgotten by the world tonight. He was extremely shocked and said, these cultivators must be the most powerful humans. But why didn't they survive? The headmaster said, almost infinite is not infinite. They can defeat the night, but they can't defeat the eternal time. Besides, in my opinion, these cultivators are far from being the most powerful. Ning Ke felt that there was something wrong with the headmaster's words. In such a cruel and realistic everlasting night, the ones who could survive should be the most powerful. At this moment, the headmaster suddenly looked at him and asked, do you think cultivation is a gift from Haotian to humans? This question was very sudden and seemed to have nothing to do with the conversation between the headmaster and the disciple. So Ning Ke did not react for a moment. When he understood the question, he suddenly thought of how he inherited the youngest uncle's mantle and joined the devil's way at the front gate of the devil's doctrine. He shook his head and said, at least not all cultivators. The headmaster looked into Ning Ke's eyes and said slowly, a real cultivator cultivates his own heart and will eventually cultivate to the absolute self. That is absolute pride. They can hide around volcanoes like the venerables of the Buddhism sect and the sages of Haotian Taoism. They can survive on a small amount of moss and only need water. But how can they accept becoming a shivering mouse in the night? The more powerful the cultivator, the more unwilling they are. So when the everlasting night comes, they do not choose to hide. They choose to fight with Yama and die. Ning Ke knew that the headmaster was right. How could someone like youngest Uncle kneel before Yama's throne or hide in a mouse hole? If the night really came in the future, second brother would definitely be the first to jump out and fight with Yama. Then, as the headmaster said, he would die. Thinking of that scene, thinking of the dark night in his dream, thinking that he might be the son of Yama, he felt that the night wind between the cliffs became colder and colder, and he suddenly had the urge to jump down. But he still had the headmaster, a pot of old wine and some beef beside him. His life was still bright and beautiful, but Sang Sang was still sick. How could he bear to do that? He looked at the flowing clouds between the cliffs and asked blankly, The hot sea is freezing, and the night in the far north is getting longer. These all indicate that the underworld is about to invade. Teacher, what should we do? The headmaster held the small yellow clay pot inside. I have been searching for decades in the world, but I still can't find the underworld. How can I know what to do? After all, cultivators compete with time. It's a pity that it's too late for me to see the scene of the last everlasting night. After saying this, he drank a mouthful of wine. His white eyebrows fluttered slightly, and a rare trace of worry appeared in his usually carefree expression. The West Hill Divine Palace is a follower of Haotian. They should know the most about the war between light and darkness. Didn't they make any preparations? Ning Ke asked. Everyone can see the darkness at the end of the road, not to mention the followers of Haotian. The headmaster said, although I don't know what happened during the last underworld invasion, I think the followers of Haotian Taoism will fight with Yama with all their might for the glory of Haotian. If they can't defeat Yama, they will hide and save their lives. They will come again when Haotian defeats Yama. Ning Ke said, it sounds a little weak. The headmaster said, they have always been weak people. Ning Ke suddenly remembered what Lianxing 32 said when he was talking about the West Hill Divine Palace and the Jishou Abbey among the white bones at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. He said, the Divine Hall is a group of dogs raised by the Jishou Abbey. So what if it's a shabby abbey? They are still dogs raised by Haotian. Haha, they are all dogs. The headmaster said, the Devil's Doctrine appeared 1,000 years ago. The great divine priest of light who founded the Devil's Doctrine never experienced the everlasting night, so there is no way to deal with it in the doctrine of the Devil's Doctrine. Ning Ke said, I heard that the Devil's Doctrine also worships Yama? The headmaster said, it's not faith, it's fear. The people in the Devil's Doctrine need an idol to resist the majesty of Haotian. It's just psychological comfort. Ning Ke thought of what Lotus had said before she died. After a moment of hesitation, he repeated it to the headmaster. Some people say that the Devil's Doctrine is a moss-covered stone that hides in the dark to avoid Haotian's divine light. They say that they don't respect Haotian, but they are actually very afraid of Haotian. That's why Haotian allows the existence of the Devil's Doctrine. In fact, there was another part of the sentence, but he cut it off. At that time, Lotus said that if Ning Ke picked up the sword left by youngest uncle, he would lose all respect and even fear of Haotian. That was the real Devil's Doctrine, and Haotian would never allow such a person to exist. The headmaster's white eyebrows fluttered and he asked, who said that? Ning Ke answered, Lianxing 32. The headmaster said, although Lotus is perverse and has some mental problems, he is still somewhat knowledgeable. Although it was dangerous for you to meet him, it was also a lucky chance. Although he had some mental problems, he was still somewhat knowledgeable. Ning Ke did not know what to say. He thought that only the headmaster or youngest uncle were qualified to comment so casually on such a talented person like Lotus. The headmaster asked, what did Lotus say about the Buddhism sect? Ning Ke said, he said that the Buddhism sect is only deliberately mystifying and is no different from a fortune teller. He also hated the Buddhism sect's emphasis on self-cultivation. When faced with the transfer of fate, they could only wait humbly and could never reach the real nirvana realm. Does the transfer of fate refer to the underworld invasion? It should be. It sounds like Lotus is not only reasonable but also knowledgeable. However, different schools and sects have their own origins. It is not appropriate for me to make such an overbearing comment. The headmaster said, according to the Buddhist scriptures a long time ago, when the Ueluan kingdom was not called Ueluan kingdom, the earliest Buddha knew about life and death. He was sad and confused and did not know how to extricate himself. He also foresaw the underworld invasion and the coming of the night. He was in unspeakable pain and did not know how to extricate himself. He traveled around and practiced self-cultivation. He sat under an osmanthus tree for 100 days and thought about how to extricate himself. He tried to make all living beings escape from death and forget the changes of day and night. Finally, the Buddha figured out a way. Ning Ke asked curiously, what way? The headmaster looked at him and said with a smile, that way is to shut up. Ning Ke thought that he had misheard and repeated subconsciously, shut up? The headmaster said, that's right. The Buddha's way is to teach all living beings to be silent and patient. They should treat everything around them as an illusion, such as wealth, pain, family, and separation. In this way, if they do not find joy in life, they will not feel pain in death. If they do not find joy in light, they will not feel pain in darkness. That's why I call this method, shut up. Ning-Kei asked confusedly, what's the similarity? The headmaster said, if one does not cry out in pain after being beaten, does it mean that one needs to shut up? Ning-Kei was amused and praised, teacher. You are indeed good at summarizing. Suddenly, he thought of Daosher monk who had died under his blade in Qinyan, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect who came to Chang, and on a snowy night. He frowned and said, if the Buddhism sect is really particular about being patient, why are the monks of the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom so evil, and why are there people from the Xiankong Temple who set foot in the mortal world? This is the result of the reverse dharma. Back then, the Buddha figured out a method to shut up and passed it down. The disciples of the Buddhism sect really believed it. In this way, the more stable one's Buddhist heart is, the more determined one will be. So what if the underworld invasion is happening? So what if it is a long night? If they are not even afraid of death, why would they be afraid of darkness? On the other hand, if they are not even afraid of darkness, why would they be afraid of death? The headmaster smiled and said, the Buddhism sect is particular about avoiding the mortal world, but this does not mean that they cannot enter the mortal world. Once they enter the mortal world, they will be even more troublesome than the fanatics of the West Hill Divine Palace. Ning-Kei thought of what the headmaster had mentioned and asked curiously, if the Buddha could predict the underworld invasion countless years later, did he not predict the ending? The headmaster said, if the prophecy is useful, why are we still alive? This sentence was very meaningful. However, Ning-Kei's mind was filled with the big secrets related to the underworld invasion. How could he let the headmaster of the academy get over it with this profound sentence? He said, teacher, this is not the attitude to tell a story. The headmaster was slightly annoyed and said, if you don't like my story, I will learn Buddhism. Ning-Kei was confused and asked, what do you mean? The headmaster said, shut up. Ning-Kei said helplessly, don't. The headmaster said, beg me. Ning-Kei said without hesitation, teacher, I beg you. I just want to know what the Buddha's prophecy is. The headmaster of the academy suddenly realized that he finally had someone who was as shameless as him. He felt helpless and comforted at the same time. He stroked his beard and said, when the Buddha traveled around, he once went to the Jisho Abbey and was invited by the Abbey Dean to read the 7 tomes of arcane. He felt the oracle of Haotian and wrote down what he had foreseen on the Ming hand scroll. Later, the great divine priest of light took the Ming hand scroll to the wilderness to establish the devil's doctrine. It had a lot to do with those words. The reason why the Yueluan Kingdom was called Yueluan Kingdom was also because of the prophecy in the Ming hand scroll. Ning-Kei said in surprise, there's a message from Buddha on the Ming hand scroll? The headmaster said, among the 7 scrolls of the tomes of arcane, the most important is the Tian hand scroll. The most interesting one is the Ming hand scroll. As for the other scrolls, let's not read them. Ning-Kei suddenly thought of a possibility and asked, teacher, have you read the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane? The headmaster answered matter-of-factly, of course. Let me tell you something serious. Recently, there have been cases of accounts being stolen. I have been reporting this to the website. Everyone, please pay more attention to your account security. In Chidian Security Center, you can use your mobile phone to authenticate, and you can set up consumer protection. There is also a very useful voucher conversion. I have been working on it. I want to make sure that you can only read books in Chidian when you top up your account. That way, at least you can't steal the game. Then, tomorrow is Saturday because I have to make up for the previous day's leave, so there will be updates. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 500. Ning-Kei's question was not about the tomes of arcane. The Ming hand scroll had always been in the academy and the headmaster could read it any time he wanted, but about the 7 volumes. When Lotus was invited to the Jisho Abbey, he had only read 2 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane. It was hard for him to imagine that there was someone in the world who had read the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane. So when he heard the headmaster's answer, he was shocked speechless. He thought that even if the headmaster was the greatest person in the world, the relationship between Haotian Taoism and the academy was so bad. How could the Taoists in the Jisho Abbey lend him the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane? The headmaster knew what he was thinking and said, "I like reading. I really wanted to read the contents of the Tomes of Arcane. I can't just stop reading because the Taoists refused to let me." Ninkei understood the hidden meaning in the headmaster's words. He gasped and said, "Did you break into the Jisho Abbey and force yourself to read the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane? What's the difference between that and a bandit?" The headmaster was a little embarrassed and said, "Books are the inheritance of knowledge. They should not be hidden deep in the mountains and not be read by others. How can reading be powerful?" The 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane, which were supreme in the eyes of the world, were no different from ordinary books in the academy, especially in the eyes of his headmaster. Since he wanted to read them, he had to read them. Thinking of this, Ninkei was shocked and proud. Being a Tang was something to be proud of. Being a disciple of the academy was even more so. Youngest uncle's reputation in the world, senior brother's occasional appearances in the mortal world, and especially the anecdotes about the headmaster that were unknown to the world had formed a very special atmosphere. No matter how shy and reserved one would eventually become proud after staying in the atmosphere of the academy for a long time. Moreover, Ninkei had never been a shy and reserved person. He clicked his tongue in wonder and then remembered the question he wanted to ask. What was the message of the Buddha on the Ming hand scroll? The headmaster said, "As I said, you will understand when you can understand the book." Ninkei then remembered that he had read the Ming hand scroll. Thinking of the unclear words on the Tomes of Arcane, such as the rotation of the sun and moon, he vaguely guessed that it was the message of the Buddha. He was even more curious about the prophecy, but how could he understand it at his current state? Whether it was the back of the mountain or the front yard of the academy, the learning atmosphere had always been free and casual. As the saying goes, one should not be ashamed to ask his subordinates. Ninkei was even more ashamed to ask his superiors. He said directly, "Teacher, I really don't understand." Ninkei was even more ashamed to ask the headmaster. The headmaster sighed and said, "Teacher, I really don't understand." Ninkei looked at his teacher's fluttering white eyebrows and was at a loss. He thought to himself, how could there be a language in this world that you don't understand? You're not an ordinary person. When the day enters, the night comes and the moon appears. The headmaster looked at the sky full of stars above the precipice and said, "The first sentence refers to the Dharma ending age mentioned by the Buddhism sect. The arrival of night means the underworld invasion. But what is moon? The Yueluan kingdom got its name from this. The moon must be a rotating object. You said a few words last year tonight, but who has seen it?" He turned to look at Ninkei and said, "The reason why I don't understand is because it is a prophecy. As I said before, if prophecies are useful, why are we still alive? Since we will live according to our own will, the prophecy may not come true. Since it may not come true, it may never appear in our world. Since it will never appear, how can we understand it?" This sentence was a little hard to pronounce, but Ninkei heard it clearly. He roughly understood his teacher's attitude towards the Ming hand scroll. After thinking for a moment, he asked, "Since the prophecy of the Buddhism sect is not important, why should I go to the Lank Temple?" The headmaster asked, "What is the Lank Temple most famous for? He should be a monk?" Ninkei thought about it in his heart, but he knew that he would be scolded by his teacher if he were to say such an answer. Suddenly he recalled the rumors about Prince Longqing before he entered Changchun, and thought about the important junctures in Master Lotus' life. He asked in disbelief, "Is it the debate?" He had answered seriously and cautiously, but he did not expect that his answer would still make the headmaster extremely dissatisfied. The headmaster said angrily, "You talk and I'll talk. That's just a group of cultivators talking about love. They're just a bunch of cultivators messing around and fooling around with those mysterious scholars and Taoist priests. It's all Lotus and the little monk from the Lank Temple's fault for starting such a bad trend." Ninkei asked, "What is the Lank Temple most famous for?" The headmaster said, "What is written on the invitation card? The Lank Temple is most famous for the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival." Ninkei said unhappily, "Even if the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival is famous, what does it have to do with me?" The headmaster said, "The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival is the Ghost Festival. It started countless years ago and originated from the legend of the underworld invasion. The most important part of it is to worship the ghosts. In the beginning, it was a ceremony for the human world to beg the underworld to come later. In other words, it was to send a message to the underworld, telling them to live a good life there and not to think about the human world." Ninkei was shocked when he realized that the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was related to the legend of the underworld. The headmaster continued, "The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was originally a festival of Haotian Taoism. I don't know why. Maybe the believers of Haotian Taoism felt that it was embarrassing for them to do such a thing, so it gradually evolved into a Taoist field with incense and Buddha's voice. However, as time passed, most people forgot the origin of this festival." Ninkei said, "If the underworld really wants to invade, how can they be sent away with just a few nice words? Besides, I think if the underworld really exists, the people there won't like to eat incense and candles." The headmaster slapped his thigh heavily and said, "Yes. Why do we need to cultivate if nice words work? That is why I have been thinking that the Taoist and Buddhist sects created this Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival to use the light of Buddha to suppress the underworld. People would only slap their thighs when they were talking excitedly." The headmaster was also excited at this time. However, he thought that the action of slapping his thigh looked a little indecent and did not match his image of a high mountain. Therefore, he did not slap his own thigh, but slapped Ninkei's thigh heavily. Feeling the burning pain from his thigh, Ninkei's expression suddenly changed. He opened his mouth, but before he could cry out in pain, he heard the second half of his teacher's words and suddenly forgot the pain. "Suppress the underworld. Is the entrance to the underworld in the Lank Temple?" The headmaster did not notice his expression at all and said, "Countless Buddhist temples in the world have the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival, not just the Lank Temple. Moreover, I have been there many years ago and did not find any entrance to the underworld. You can go and look for it again this time. Maybe it will answer some of your questions." The headmaster spoke calmly and casually, but Ninkei was shocked. Thinking of the words "suppress the underworld" made him feel uncomfortable all over. His skin itched terribly, as if some black smoke was about to seep out of his pores. The Buddhism sect was now suspecting that he was the son of Yama. If he went to the Lank Temple to participate in the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival, wouldn't he be suppressed by the light of Buddha? Would he be suppressed under the mountain for 500 years? There was a light mountain breeze between the cliffs, and the wisteria fruits hanging in the rain corridor swayed with the wind. They were shaped like copper bells, but there was no clear sound. Only a few light popping sounds could be heard as the ripe fruits fell to the ground and burst into juice. The unique fragrance of the wisteria, which was a mixture of fat and fresh, immediately filled the air. Ninkei thought for a long time and plucked up his courage to ask, "Teacher, what is the son of Yama?" The headmaster looked at the night clouds in front of the master and disciple and said, "According to the records of the Xiankong Temple's Book of Light and the Ming Hand Scroll, Yama has 70,000 children. Every time the day and night alternates and before the underworld invasion, a son of Yama will come to the human world to foretell and guide the coming of the night." "Guide?" Ninkei repeated in surprise. The headmaster said, "Of course, the coming of the night needs guidance, just like the light needs guidance. Of course, all these years I have been thinking whether it is guidance or projection." Ninkei lowered his head again and kept silent for a long time. It was not until the night grew darker and the starlight became dimmer and the night clouds between the cliffs became as black as ink that he said, "Teacher, if I am really the son of Yama, will you kill me?" The headmaster looked at him and smiled. He said matter-of-factly again, "Of course." Ninkei raised his head and looked at him. His eyes were full of innocence and begging, like a kitten that had just opened its eyes and was extremely pitiful because of hunger and fear of the strange world. Everyone's life is unique. Even if all the lives in the world are added up, they are only as unique as my life. Teacher, you can't take it too hard. The headmaster looked at him and said seriously, to exchange one's life for the safety of billions of people in the world. This is what a hero and a saint should do. If that day really comes, I hope you can kill yourself. Ning-Ke naturally disagreed and said indignantly, I have said that eldest brother is a benevolent person and second brother is a man of ideals. I am just a selfish person. I don't even want to be a man of ideals, let alone a saint. Teacher, you have gone too far by using such words to provoke me. The headmaster suddenly laughed out loud. Hearing the laughter, Ning-Ke was a little helpless. The headmaster looked at him and said with admiration, Not bad, not bad. Since you are a human, you should be a human. Why do you have to be a saint? You have thought it through. In my opinion, since you can think it right, I believe you will not do anything wrong in the future. I am very pleased, haha. In the night, the hearty and even arrogant laughter echoed between the cliffs and gradually disappeared. Ning-Ke was still extremely helpless and did not know what to say. The headmaster looked at him and said with a smile, The son of Yama needs to be defined, but it cannot be defined by humans. Only you can define it. Just like how humans are humans because we believe that we are humans. Only we can define humans, not Hao-Yin or other beings. Ning-Ke smiled bitterly and said, Teacher, what you said makes sense. I am not flattering you. I really think it makes sense. But only you are qualified to say this. The headmaster said, I did not say this. It was your youngest uncle who said it. Go for the massage. Have a good weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 501. So it was Little Antmaster's words. Ning-Ke looked at the faintest light in Chang and city in the distance. After a long silence he asked, Teacher, do we really have to go to the Lang Temple? The headmaster said, It's up to you. But if you don't go, no one will be able to answer your doubts, not even me. And I always feel that this trip to the Lang Temple is your lucky chance. Ning-Ke asked, What kind of lucky chance? I'm not a person who believes in destiny. The headmaster said, however, after seeing many things over the years, I gradually feel that my views are too stubborn. I have some new understandings. Fortuitous encounters are not something that is destined to happen by the heavenly Tao. Instead, some people living in this world, because of the ideals in their hearts, even a single thought will begin to affect the environment and people around them. In the end, it will affect the other party who is extremely far away. Until you meet them, the thoughts in your mind will turn into actual stories. Then, you will go back to the beginning of the story, and you will often find that what you want in the end is what you want. This is probably fate. The headmaster continued, Sang Sang might be able to recover on her own, but it would be better if she could take a look at the little monk in the Lang Temple. You have inherited your youngest uncle's legacy, so you still need to learn some Buddhist Dharma to dilute the hostility. You have to figure out if you are the son of Yama, and you should go and see what the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival is all about. It is your lucky chance that you need to do all this. Ning-Ke said absent-mindedly, It sounds like what the monks say, but I don't understand. The headmaster said, You'll understand if you listen more to the monks. Will it be dangerous? You'll get hit by a carriage while walking. Teacher, I'll take your words as a tacit agreement. Since when did I recognize him? Ning-Ke withdrew his gaze from Chang and looked down at his knees. He said, If even you think it's dangerous, what about me and Sang Sang? The headmaster smiled and said, Without simmering it for 3 days and 3 nights, how can the Buddha jumps over the wall be achieved? If you don't. Ning-Ke raised his hands and begged for mercy. He said painfully, I've heard what youngest uncle said so many times. Teacher, you don't have to say it again. The headmaster said, Let's go and take a look. We won't know until we see. Ning-Ke sighed and said, The world is so wonderful. The headmaster said in surprise, I didn't expect you to receive it so well. What's good about it? There's a rhyme. I just feel bored. It was still windy tonight, and the cliffs were very gentle. However, Ning-Ke was not in a relaxed mood. He asked with a gloomy expression, Teacher, you are a man of great ability. Can't you see the future? The headmaster said, "The end of cultivation is time. Even though I have lived longer than ordinary people, I am not old enough to experience the last underworld invasion. I did not see what happened before the everlasting night. It is probably because of this that I cannot fully understand the Ming hand scroll. I do not know how this story will develop. Now that you are a character in this story, I do not know what changes will happen to you in the future. But I hope it will be good." Ning Ke asked, "Are there still people in this world who experienced the last underworld invasion?" In the past, he did not believe that cultivators could live for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. However, as he entered the back of the mountain of the academy and became more knowledgeable, he began to wonder if there was such a thing as immortality in the world. The headmaster said, "I know 2 people who experienced the last everlasting night." Ning Ke did not expect that there would be such people. He asked in surprise, "What kind of people?" The headmaster seemed to have thought of something, and his expression became a little complicated. He said indifferently, "A drunkard and a butcher. But they do not care about the affairs of the world. I am afraid they are not people." Ning Ke once again thought of the strange dreams he had. In one of his dreams, a drunkard and a butcher appeared. They stood beside him and stared at him. In another dream, the headmaster snatched the wine bag from the drunkard's hand and drank a mouthful. Then, he snatched a pig's hind leg from the butcher's back and took a bite. Could the headmaster be talking about those 2 people? Ning Ke was shocked and said, "Teacher, do you really not want to hear my dream?" The headmaster looked at him and said with a smile, "Do you still not understand? That is your own dream after all." At this point, Ning Ke finally understood what the headmaster meant. Any story needed to be advanced in order to know the future development. Any scene had to be seen with one's own eyes in order to know what color it was. Whether one was the son of Yama or what would happen in the future, one had to walk in the story and then choose. In other words, one was the author. The headmaster floated away. Only Ning Ke was left on the dark cliff. Looking at the night sky and the flowing clouds, he thought of what Master Lotus said to him before he died and frowned. "You have joined the devil. If you want to cultivate the devil, you must first cultivate the Buddha. Then please walk bravely into the night. Although you have no chance of success and may die as soon as you start on the road, I still wish you well and curse you." He silently repeated these words, then stood up and waved his hand at the darkness that occupied his entire field of vision, saying, "If you really are the Netherworld King, if I really am your son, then please remember that when teacher can't protect me, you must protect me a little." In the West Hill on the lush spring peach mountain, the black divine hall of judgment exuded a cold and murderous aura. The hall was extremely spacious. Hundreds of priests in red robes and deacons in black kneeled on the smooth and flat ground, looking like a red flower in the dark night on the ground. The priests and deacons had been kneeling for a long time, and their knees were already aching. But no one dared to get up or even look up. They looked down at their own reflections on the smooth floor of the divine hall, and saw the humble expressions on their faces. Even they could not understand why they were so humble. A deep fear from the bottom of their hearts made their bodies stiff. As a result, the red flower in the dark night on the ground became a little rustling. Instead of feeling beautiful, it could only make people feel cold and bloody. For countless years, the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace had been like this. People in the judicial department dealt with horrible punishments all day long and believed in the principle that the strong would always be strong. So no one was unfamiliar with this atmosphere. The divine hall of judgment did not change much. It was still empty and cold. The blood-like seat of heavenly black jade was still there. But the bead curtain in front of the seat of heavenly black jade had been broken into bead powder in the battle a few days ago, and could no longer be repaired. In the end, it was swept into the garbage by the handyman and disappeared. The bead curtain had been in the divine hall of judgment for many years, and added a lot of mysterious and horrible aura to the powerful man on the seat of heavenly black jade. People were used to the existence of the bead curtain. Now they had to get used to the bead curtain because the powerful man on the seat of heavenly black jade was dead. Now sitting on the seat of heavenly black jade was a young and beautiful girl. Of course, in the eyes of the subordinates of the judicial department, the girl's body now had some kind of divinity. Because they could not look at her directly, They did not have the concept of beauty in the secular world. She represented power and horror. After a long time, Yi Hongyu sat on the seat of heavenly black jade with her hands supporting her chin. She remained silent and expressionless. She was extremely calm, which made her look extremely cold. When she did not speak, the entire divine hall of judgment did not dare to make any sound. All the divine priests and deacons knelt on the ground and did not dare to look up. They did not even dare to guess what was going on. Some timid people clenched their teeth in fear and found that the sound was so clear that they almost fainted. Yi Hongyu looked at the people who knelt respectfully in front of the seat of heavenly black jade and listened to their nervous and frightened breathing. She recalled what she had seen and experienced over the years. There was a faint sense of mockery and disgust in her beautiful eyes. She even felt a little tired. A divine priest walked in from the side of the divine hall and bowed respectfully in front of the seat of heavenly black jade. Yi Hongyu waved her hand in annoyance. The divine priest opened the thick dossier and looked at the people who knelt in fear in front of the seat of heavenly black jade. He said expressionlessly, "The merciful and majestic Haotian has guided people out of the dark wilderness. The apostles with sharp swords have broken the ice in the ancient river and stand in front of the bonfire to announce to the people, like the change of dynasties in the secular world, the inheritance of the great divine priest of judgment would always set off a storm of blood." As the indifferent voice of the divine priest sounded, 14 red-robed divine priests and deacons in black were dragged out of the divine hall of judgment. There were sounds of axes chopping and cries from time to time outside the hall. These 14 divine priests and deacons were the staunch supporters of the former great divine priest of judgment. Some of them had to die. They might have to live to continue to contribute to the West Hill Divine Palace. The dead should be rejoiced because the living would spend the rest of their lives regretting their foolishness when the Tao addict lost her power. The divine priest's voice echoed in the empty divine hall of judgment. As the names were called out one by one, the subordinates of the judicial department who knelt on the ground became more and more frightened. No one knew if their name would be called. Only the commanders of cavalrymen of divine hall in black and gold armor, who knelt in the middle, seemed relatively calm. The commanders of cavalrymen of divine hall were directly under the jurisdiction of the judicial department. But after the death of Prince Longqing 2 years ago, the power of personnel and punishment of cavalrymen of divine hall was transferred from the hierarch lord to the commander of the divine guards, Luo Kadi. And these commanders believed that although they were not respectful to the current great divine priest of judgment, they were not those powerless divine priests who only knew how to read scriptures. They were powerhouses in the see-through state. The judicial department was very realistic. As long as one had enough power, he could redeem the corresponding sins and be qualified to continue living. After all, the West Hill Divine Palace ruled the world by executors like them. However, what no one in the temple expected was that the priest's gaze finally landed on the gorgeous black and gold armor of these cavalry commanders. He then slowly read out their names. Zmo Yuanjun Lu Shao. Hearing their names, the commanders of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall could not suppress their fear and bewilderment. They raised their heads and looked at the seat of heavenly black jade one after another. However, they found that the girl sitting on the seat of heavenly black jade was supporting her chin with her hands and eyes closed, as if she had fallen asleep. The cavalry commander named Zmo was the most qualified and the most powerful among them. He looked at his colleagues who were frightened but did not know what to do. He shook his head and slowly stood up, patted his knees, looked at the girl on the throne and asked slowly why. "If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 502. Other than the broken bead curtain that day, the Divine Hall of Judgment had been free of dust for many years. Of course, that did not include the fine sand in the depths of the stone cracks, which could only be forced out by the horrible aura of the seat of heavenly black jade. But at least kneeling on the ground for a while would not touch any dirt. That was why Commander Zmo stood up and patted his knees. He did not really want to get rid of any dust. He just wanted to express his contempt for the girl on the seat of heavenly black jade to regain his confidence, so that he would not be crushed by the majesty of the seat of heavenly black jade again. There were 10 teams of cavalrymen from the Divine Hall of West Hill. Each team had a commander. Commander Zmo had long entered the upper state of see-through, and was as famous as Chanbachi. Of course, he knew that he was no match for Yi Hongyu, but he had to stand up because he did not want to die. Yi Hongyu blinked and slowly opened her eyes. She looked at the man in front of the seat of heavenly black jade without any expression on her face. Before she could speak, she frowned and coughed painfully. A maidservant nervously walked to the seat of heavenly black jade, and handed her a silk handkerchief that was as white as snow. Yi Hongyu took the handkerchief and gently wiped her lips. 2 red plum blossoms appeared on the white handkerchief. Everyone in the Divine Hall of West Hill knew that Yi Hongyu was seriously injured, including these powerful commanders. But even though the judicial department had always followed the law of the jungle, no one dared to take advantage of her injury because no one had the confidence. When Yi Hongyu broke the bead curtain and killed the former great divine priest of judgment, everyone in the Divine Hall thought that she would take over the position of great divine priest of judgment. But to everyone's surprise, after closing her eyes and resting for a moment, she walked down from the seat of heavenly black jade and walked towards the white divine temple at the highest point of Peach Mountain. Under the astonished gazes of countless people, she severely injured Luo Kadi, the commander of the divine guards, with 1 strike. If not for the hierarch's order, she would have killed that person. Few people in the world could kill the great divine priest of judgment and then the commander of the divine guards. Even if they could do it, they probably wouldn't dare to do it. Logically speaking, even if Yi Hongyu broke through to the knowing destiny state, she wouldn't be able to do it. But she dared to do it and actually succeeded. The image of the indigo robe flying on the Peach Mountain would forever remain in the memory of everyone in the Divine Hall. That battle had completely established the status of the indigo robe girl in the Divine Hall. From that day on, no one in the Divine Hall of Judgment would dare to challenge Her Majesty. Zmo did not dare to be picky, even if he saw her coughing up blood and knew that she was seriously injured at this time. After defeating the terrifying great divine priest of judgment and the powerful commander Luo Kadi, the girl on the throne did not die and only suffered some injuries. This definitely did not mean that she was weak, it only meant that she was indescribably powerful. Yi Hongyu held her chin and looked at him quietly. She said softly, "Kneel." At this time, the priests and deacons who were still kneeling on the ground of the Divine Hall couldn't help but look at each other when they heard these 2 words. They naturally remembered the scene when the great divine priest walked into the Divine Hall that day, and recalled that they had once enthusiastically shouted for him to kneel down, and their expressions suddenly became extremely strange. The divine priests and deacons understood the fear and thoughts in each other's eyes. They raised their heads and pointed to the only standing commander Zmo. They shouted angrily, "Kneel! Kneel! Kneel!" Hundreds of people shouted in unison, their voices rumbling like thunder, echoing in the empty Divine Hall of Judgment. Their expressions were so angry that their spittle flew everywhere. Their voices were a little hoarse, and their facial features were distorted. They looked like a group of fanatical lunatics. Yi Hongyu looked at them calmly. She was a little satisfied and a little tired. Zmo's face became paler and paler, and his body became stiffer and stiffer. He couldn't even maintain his balance and swayed like a weak patient. Hearing the thunderous scolding coming from beside him, Zmo looked at his colleagues who were usually gentle and even flattering but now had become so cold and angry. "Why?" He asked the question again, but he was not as calm as before. He even deliberately had a trace of disrespect, and his eyes were full of a pitiful look. The divine priest closed the thick file and looked at Zmo and the cavalry commanders who were kneeling on the ground and begging for mercy. He scolded them coldly, "How dare you? You are the generals of the Divine Hall, but you have fallen so low. The great divine priest thought that you have made some small contributions to the judicial department and showed mercy. He did not take your bodies, but only stripped you of your duties and cultivation and demoted you to commoners. You are not grateful for God's grace, but how dare you talk here? If they were not stripped of their bodies, they would not be beheaded." However, as the cavalry commanders of the West Hill Divine Hall, Zmo and the others had helped the judicial department hunt down the remnants of the devil's doctrine and search for heresy. They had done many things and many people wanted them dead. If they were really stripped of their cultivation and chased out of Peach Mountain, they would lose the protection of the West Hill Divine Hall. What kind of miserable ending would they face? Hearing this, Zemo's body shook even more and he almost fell to the ground. He looked at the girl on the throne and shouted in horror, "Only Commander Luo has the authority to punish us. Great Divine Priest, you have overstepped your authority. Aren't you worried that the Hierarch Lord will be angry?" Yi Hongyu slowly sat up and looked at him expressionlessly. She said, "Commander Luo Kadi is now sick in bed. So the Hierarch Lord has returned your authority to me." Luo Kadi, the commander of the West Hill Divine Hall Divine Guards, was a grand cultivator who had entered the Knowing Destiny state many years ago. How could such a person be sick? Everyone knew that the real reason Commander Luo Kadi was sick in bed was not because of illness, but because he was seriously injured by Yi Hongyu. Thinking of this, the people of the judicial department felt a chill in their hearts. The thunderous scolding in the Divine Hall gradually disappeared. Zemo's face became paler and paler. He stood there in a daze and said in a hoarse voice, "Great Divine Priest, please tell us what sins we have committed." The Divine Priest looked serious and was about to scold him again. At this moment, Yi Hongyu raised her hand. The Divine Priest immediately shut up and humbly retreated to the side of the seat of heavenly black jade. Yi Hongyu quietly looked at Zemo and the cavalry commanders for a long time. There was dead silence in the Divine Hall of Judgment. Yi Hongyu suddenly smiled and said calmly, "You know very well that all sins are fake. The reason why I want to expel you from the Divine Hall is very simple. It is because you once looked at me in that way, so I don't want to see you again." Zemo suddenly understood. Last spring Yi Hongyu was weak because she had fallen into a lower realm. The whole Divine Hall was rumored that Commander Luo Kadi had obtained the approval of the Hierarch Lord, and was ready to propose marriage to her. Under such circumstances, the cavalry commanders led by Chanbachi gradually looked at her differently. Some of them showed greed like Chanbachi, some showed pity as if they were admiring a weak beauty, and some looked at her as if she were their sister-in-law. There was no hostility in these gazes, and not all of them were malicious. However, when those gazes fell on the great Divine Priest of Judgment, then they all deserved to die. Zemo was desperate. He looked down at the smooth floor of the Divine Hall and said with a faint smile, "We have made so many contributions to the Divine Hall. Do we have to die just because we looked at her a few more times? We deserve to die just because we looked at her a few more times." Yi Hongyu said with a smile, "If you had not made some contributions to the judicial department, do you think I would let you leave Peach Mountain alive?" Zemo looked at her on the seat of heavenly black jade and said in a trembling voice with the last glimmer of hope, "Great Divine Priest, we are still of some use. Our cultivation can still help the Divine Hall. No, help you do something. It is a pity that we are crippled like this. Please give us a chance to atone for our crimes." Yi Hongyu was a little tired. She rested her chin on her hand and said, "I have said that you are not guilty. How can you atone for your crimes? I just don't want to see you." The priest walked forward again and looked at the cavalry commanders. He said calmly, "You will receive your punishment later. Great Divine Priest has compassion on you and has specially given you an old horse to plow the fields and 100 taels of silver to settle down." Inside the Divine Hall of Judgment, hundreds of people knelt on the ground trembling. No one dared to obey. Zemo slowly clenched his fists, and the commanders beside him could not help but look up. Yi Hongyu did not even look at them. The priest looked at them as if he did not see their emotional changes. He continued to say expressionlessly, "In the future, if you step into the West Hill Divine Kingdom, you will die. If you dare to mention that you have served the Divine Hall, you will die. If you hold a grudge and speak nonsense, you will die." Zemo looked around. It was silent. After the commanders heard the cruel verdict, they did not dare to look him in the eye. After a long time, the struggling expression on his face turned into a strong self-mockery. He sighed sadly and slowly knelt on the ground, accepting the cruel punishment in pain and speechlessness. The side of the Divine Hall of Judgment lit up with a holy and cold light. Zemo's painful and angry beast-like howls and the cavalry commander's painful cries rose one after another. They had worked hard for half of their lives and finally entered the see-through realm. They had become real powerhouses. But today their cultivation was destroyed, and they became ordinary people who were even worse than ordinary people. Gradually, the Black Divine Hall of Judgment became calm and even colder and scarier. The empty Divine Hall was so quiet that it did not seem to belong to the human world. Yi Hongyu sat on the blood-colored seat of heavenly black jade, looking calm. The seat of heavenly black jade was very big, and it should not be comfortable to sit on it. But she was very comfortable sitting on it. The trusted priest knelt in front of the seat of heavenly black jade and advised in a low voice, "Great divine priest, Zmo and the others are indeed very powerful. And from their previous performance, you can look forward to their loyalty to you. It would be a pity to cripple them and expel them from the divine hall." And Commander Luo, Yi Hongyu slightly lowered her head on the seat of heavenly black jade. She rested her chin on her hand, as if she had fallen asleep. Luo Kadi is just a loser. One day I will kill him. Since that is the case, why should I care about his feelings? And no one can see that the world is changing. It will change into a world that many people are unfamiliar with. In that world, even grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state can be killed at any time. Any idea of relying on cultivators in the see-through state is so ridiculous. In the late spring of the 16th year of the Tianqi era of the Tang Empire, and the 3447th year of the Great Rule of West Hill, 7 commanders of the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall were destroyed by the new Great Divine Priest of Judgment, Yi Hongyu, and were expelled from the Divine Hall. They were forbidden to step into the West Hill Divine Kingdom again. These once glorious commanders led an old and skinny horse, with 100 taels of silver in their pockets, and walked down the Peach Mountain with their squires like stray dogs. In the records of the West Hill Divine Palace, the crimes of these 7 cavalrymen were very vague. There was only one word: depravity. Therefore they had a shameful nickname, Fallen Knights. And people in the West Hill Divine Palace knew very well that the reason why these cavalrymen were so severely punished was because they took an extra glance at the girl in the crowd last spring. It's really painful to save manuscripts. Please vote for me on Monday to relieve my pain. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 503. Trash. Scum. Get out. In the depths of the West Hill, in the cliffs covered by green vines, hoarse curses full of resentment and violence were heard. The curses were sharp and unpleasant, like sharp swords that could pierce through countless layers of armor. For some reason, they were tightly sealed around the cliffs and did not leak to the outside world. The green vines suddenly became chaotic. A figure flew out from the deep cave and fell heavily on the stone platform. It was a young man in an old Taoist robe. After a long time, he finally woke up and struggled to get up. He held the green vines on the cliff and coughed painfully. Blood spattered from his lips and soon dyed the front of his Taoist robe red. He looked extremely miserable and pitiful. The Taoist was Long Qing. He grabbed the green vines and rested for a while. After confirming that his injury was not serious, he walked to the edge of the cliff, picked up the bucket and the box, and continued to walk to the caves above the cliff. There was no fear or resentment in his calm eyes. He did not even look back at the deep cave. These days, he climbed the cliff covered with green vines every day and dealt with the seriously injured old Taoists in the caves. He deeply felt the violent and horrible temper of these abnormal people. After being humiliated so many times, he naturally became numb. After being injured so many times, he became more and more aware of the huge gap between him and the old Taoist. There was no resentment or revenge. Although the disabled old Taoists in the caves did not have a good face to Long Qing and could order him around, they knew that if they wanted to know the news of the human world in time and keep in touch with the outside world, they could not kill Long Qing directly. Therefore, they still had a sense of propriety. They made Long Qing suffer but did not affect his action. However, there were many caves in the cliff and there were many disabled old Taoists. Everyone thought that they had a sense of propriety, but when they came together, no one knew where their propriety went. Longqing's injuries in each cave were not serious, but after so many days in so many caves, his injuries were getting worse by the day. Because of his injury, Longqing moved much slower. It was almost dusk when he finished the day's work and returned to the Taoist temple. The warm and red setting sun shone on the simple Taoist temple from the other end of the West Hill Mountains. He stood in front of the hut by the lake and looked at the beautiful scenery without any expression on his face. The middle-aged Taoist walked slowly to his side and looked at the surface of the lake in the twilight. He did not explain to him the identity of the old Taoists in the caves, but said indifferently, "The more beautiful a place is, the fewer people there are." Longqing bowed to the middle-aged Taoist and asked, "Uncle Master, are there always so few people in the monastery?" From the South Sea to the Jishou Abbey, Longqing did not see anyone other than the three martial uncles. The simple and beautiful Taoist temple was shrouded in silence. 10 years ago, when Pippi and the little girl were still here, the monastery was much livelier. But then everyone left, and Yisu only came back occasionally, so the monastery inevitably became a little lonely. The middle-aged Taoist said, "But I heard that the little girl has inherited the position of the Great Divine Priest of Judgment, and the Great Divine Priest of Light and the Great Divine Priest of Revelation will probably be replaced. Then, the monastery will be lively for a few days." The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace, the three great divine priests, the nation master of Tang, and people like Master Yen Sei all needed to be baptized by Haotian in the Jishou Abbey before they could be awarded the position of great divine priest. Longqing knew this story, but he could not help but feel a little lost when he thought that Yi Hongyu had already reached this step. The Holy Land in the hearts of the disciples of Haotian Taoism, the legendary unknown place in the cultivation world, turns out to be such a simple and even boring Taoist temple. Is it a little different from what you imagined? Longqing shook his head and said, "Since it is unknown, we can't imagine it. We can only know by seeing it with our own eyes. No, even if we live here, we may not know." The middle-aged Taoist looked at him with a smile and said, "It's good that you can understand this. The Jishou Abbey is a place outside the world, so it can be simple, quiet, and even lonely. If you really think that the Jishou Abbey you see is the Jishou Abbey, then you are stupid. The Taoists living in that mountain are the Jishou Abbey. The West Hill Divine Palace is the Jishou Abbey. The Abbey Dean is the Jishou Abbey, you and I are the Jishou Abbey, and the whole Haotian Taoism is the Jishou Abbey. As long as the light of Haotian shines, it is the Jishou Abbey. Before you came to the Jishou Abbey, you were already in the Jishou Abbey." The middle-aged Taoist's words seemed a little profound, but Longqing at least understood the first sentence. The disabled old Taoist priests living in the cave were unknown in the world, but their cultivation states were extremely terrifying. Some of them had obviously surpassed the 5 states and become the legendary sage in the scriptures. Such a Jishou Abbey was indeed a great place that was hard to imagine. "I know very well how bad the temperament of the old guys living in the cave is. Since you are injured, you don't need to bear it. Although it is good for your temperament, it will damage your Taoist body and eventually become an obstacle to your future cultivation. Later, you can go to the pharmacy to make some medicine." The middle-aged Taoist looked at him and said. Longqing seemed to inadvertently think of something and asked, "Uncle, when I was tidying up the medicine warehouse a few days ago, I saw a medicine tripod. I wonder if I can use it?" The middle-aged Taoist's eyes revealed an expression of appreciation and said, "It seems that you have learned something from cultivating the Sha hand scroll. Your mind is not confused by the complicated cultivation methods, and you can even notice the medicine refining method recorded in the corner. Maybe this is your blessing. If you want to use the medicine tripod, just use it and wash it clean afterwards." The medicine warehouse of the Jishou Abbey was not located by the lake, but on the cliff to the west. It was a 2-story Taoist temple building with complicated talisman characters carved between the pillars and painted with gorgeous patterns. It gave off a sense of nobility and looked more like the main hall of a Taoist temple compared to the huts worshipping the 7 tomes of arcane by the lake. In front of the Hall of Medicine was a large meadow slope. Below the slope was a precipice. The precipice was so deep that even apes and monkeys could not climb it, let alone ordinary people. Even if the world's amazing grand cultivators could climb this precipice, they would be instantly killed by the array hidden in the meadow. Long Qing looked at the meadow that seemed to be burning in the twilight, and felt the faintly discernible power of the array. After a moment of silence, he turned and walked to the Hall of Medicine. He held a big old iron ring in his hand, on which there were many seemingly ordinary keys. Without these keys, it was impossible for him to enter the Hall of Medicine. The door of the Hall of Medicine slowly opened, revealing a vast space that did not match the appearance of the hall at all. Several rows of array racks stretched into the depths of the hall. It seemed to be a few miles away with no end in sight. There were countless rare medicines and raw materials placed on the array racks. Each medicine and material had a corresponding array to provide suitable ventilation and a warm and humid environment. These medicines and materials were rarely seen in the world. Many of them were even marked as missing in the West Hill scriptures. If they were to enter the world, it would probably attract countless cultivators to fight for them. However, there were too many kinds of rare medicines and materials here, but they seemed so ordinary. They were casually placed on the array racks and seemed to have been there for many years, with no one paying attention to them for many years. It was hard to imagine, but it was easy to understand. Whether it was the emperor of the South Jin Kingdom or the monarch of the Kingdom of Song, they had to bow before the West Hill Divine Palace. No matter if they were poor or rich, they had to offer their wealth to the West Hill Divine Palace. This meant that all the wealth and resources in the world belonged to the West Hill Divine Palace. In the words of Master Lotus, the West Hill Divine Palace was a group of dogs raised by the Jisho Abbey. The West Hill Divine Palace plundered all the wealth and resources in the world. Other than maintaining the rule of Haotian Taoism over the world, the most precious things were naturally sent to the Jisho Abbey. From this point of view, what the middle-aged Taoist said earlier was right. The world that was enveloped by the light of Haotian belonged to the Jisho Abbey, except for the country called Tang. Long Qing had been in charge of cleaning up the entire Jisho Abbey these days. He also had to come to the Hall of Medicine every day to pick out the medicines that the terrifying old Taoist in the cave needed. He was already very familiar with this place, so he was not as shocked as he was when he first entered. He carried the key and walked into the depths of the hall, not even glancing at the medicines on both sides. Anyone could develop such a state of mind after living in the mountains of gold and seas of jade. However, when Long Qing walked to the deepest part of the Hall of Medicine and walked to the hollowed-out sandalwood door, his expression became solemn. Behind the hollowed-out sandalwood door was the most important place in the Hall of Medicine, where some of the most precious materials and medicines were stored. He had never entered before because he did not have the key to this door. The medicine tripod that Long Qing needed was right outside the door. He had seen it once through the wooden door a few days ago. Today, he asked tentatively and did not expect to receive permission from the uncle. He found the simplest key on the big iron ring and inserted it into the lock. There was a slight click, and the sandalwood door slowly opened. Long Qing walked in and began to look for the medicinal materials he needed. Most of the materials for the medicine he was going to make were in the main hall. Only 2 of the most important materials should be stored here. Therefore, he was very cautious and even a little nervous. The medicine he was going to make was called the Earth-Sitting Pill in the Sha Handscroll of the Tomes of the Arcane. In addition to curing the injuries left by the old Taoist priests these days, more importantly, it could stabilize his ocean of qi and mountain of snow that had been forcibly repaired by the Abbey Dean. In other words, this kind of pill could make his cultivation go more smoothly. A pill with such an effect was, of course, extremely precious. In the records of the West Hill, it was even described as the supreme elixir that could heal the dead. Long Qing had never imagined that one day, he would have the opportunity to make such an elixir. Therefore, his nervousness at this time was understandable. All of a sudden, the nervousness on Long Qing's face was replaced by shock. He did not find the medicinal materials needed to make the earth-sitting pill. But among those bottles and jars, he saw a crystal-clear small porcelain bottle made of unknown materials. There was a very faint smell of medicine coming from the small porcelain bottle. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 504. The Lang Temple was far away in the southeast. It was a long journey, and no one was willing to make time too tight. Therefore, even though the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was held in autumn, most of the tourists and diplomatic corps of the Tang Empire who were preparing to participate in the festival chose to set off in early summer. The Academy was the first to receive the invitation from the Lang Temple and sent Ning Ke as their representative. Sang Sang, who had recovered, followed him as well. Their departure time was today. Other than the eldest brother who had to travel with the headmaster of the Academy, the disciples of the back mountain of the Academy rarely appeared in the world. These idiots would only feel happy if they stayed in their own world. For them, the back mountain was big enough, and there was no need for them to stir up trouble in the mortal world. Based on this belief, they did not envy their youngest brother who needed to cultivate in the mortal world. Instead, they sympathized with him. Therefore, when Ning Ke set off, just like when he went to the wilderness 2 years ago, all the senior brothers and sisters came to see him off and gave him small gifts to comfort him. Fourth brother and sixth brother often designed and made good things for Ning Ke, so they did not give him anything special this time. It was just an inconspicuous box. Ninth brother Beigong and 10th brother Shimin were still the most careless. They stood by the lake and played a farewell song as a gift. Listening to the sad sound of the flute and zither, Ning Ke snatched back half of the sealwort from the big black horse's mouth. He looked at his 2 senior brothers who were beaming with joy and said angrily, "Is this a farewell or a funeral? Can you not be so unreliable?" The big black horse was also very angry at this time, but no one cared about it. The big white goose was swimming slowly in the mirror lake, pretending to be deep. The little white wolf was half squatting beside Tang Xiaotong's legs, listening to her and Song Song's conversation. It tilted its head slightly, as if it understood something. When the song was over, Beigong Weiyang came forward and took out a thin piece of paper from his bosom. He reluctantly handed it over and said, "Little brother, this is the Bailing Sanka score that the world thought was lost. It's extremely precious. You can't give me another unreliable one." Ning Ke wondered why he wanted a score. Tang Xiaotang, the saintess of the diabolism's doctrine, called him youngest uncle. Would he meet the saintess on his journey? But then he thought that if the score was really precious, it could be sold for a lot of money. He took it without hesitation. A score is not a score? Reliable, reliable. Do you know what reliable means? Relying is a term used in chess, so the word reliable refers to the chess records. The fifth brother walked proudly to the center of the crowd, bringing with him an endless sour smell. It was unknown how many days he had not taken a bath. The seventh sister could not help but frown and nag a few words, but he did not care. The Lang Temple is not a dragon's pool or a tiger's den. It is not worth playing such a sad song. Even if it is sad, it is still a joke. However, that shabby temple is famous for the chess world. The monks in the temple are really good at chess. Eighth brother, who had always been indifferent to worldly affairs, looked at Ning Ke with unprecedented determination and said, "Eighth brother and I have been practicing hard in the academy. Those monks were lucky enough to be invited to the Lang Temple. Youngest brother, you must not tarnish the reputation of the academy in chess and embarrass me on this trip." As soon as he finished speaking, eighth brother came over with a thick pile of chess records in his arms. He looked at Ning Ke and earnestly said, "Youngest brother, you've seen us play dozens of games. Even if we are stupid, our state should be much higher than those monks. It's just that you're too lazy, so your basic skills are not good." These are the chess records carefully made by 2 senior brothers. You can practice more on the way. Ning Ke was already stunned. He thought, where is this? At this moment, fifth brother snatched the chess records from eighth brother's arms and scolded him sternly, "Stupid! What is the use of these chess records for youngest brother?" Ning Ke was overjoyed. He nodded and said, "Yes, yes." However, he did not expect that fifth brother would turn around and give the thick pile of chess records to Sang Sang. Song Song's understanding of chess is far better than youngest brother's. Fifth brother looked at Sang Sang and said pleasantly, "Sang Sang, the important task of maintaining the academy's #1 chess player in the world will be handed over to you." The academy was in the southern suburbs of Chang'an, so they did not have to worry about the city gate being closed. Therefore, in order to avoid the summer heat, Ningke and Sangsang did not leave until the sun was setting and night was falling. Looking at the black horse carriage gradually disappearing into the clouds on the mountainside, second brother frowned slightly. He felt that the atmosphere today was a little strange, as if there were some hidden things that he could not see clearly. Eldest brother watched the black horse carriage leave. After a moment of silence, he turned and left. The twilight shone on his old cotton-padded jacket, and some dust could be seen faintly. It seemed that his cotton sleeves were trembling slightly. Second brother looked back at eldest brother's back on the mountain road. He was slightly moved and chased after him. Eldest brother walked very slowly, but for some reason it was difficult for second brother to catch up. When eldest brother walked to the hut, the sun was about to set. The night shrouded the valley, and stars appeared one after another in the dark sky. The headmaster of the academy stood outside the hut, half bent and squinting at a cylindrical iron object. He did not know what was in the iron cylinder. Eldest brother walked behind the headmaster of the academy and asked, "Teacher, what are you looking at?" "I'm looking at the stars." "Well, I should say stargazing. It's more elegant." The headmaster of the academy motioned him to come over and said, "This is made by sixth brother and 13th brother as a gift to me. They named it stargazing mirror. I tried it before, and the stars are still the same, but it can magnify the scenery in the distance. I think it's better to use a telescope." Eldest brother put his eyes in front of the iron cylinder and found that, as the teacher said, the stars in the iron cylinder did not become bigger. But if he looked at the mountains in the distance under the starlight, they would be clearly magnified. "It's really interesting. Youngest brother really knows a lot of things," he said with a smile, but his smile was a little worried. The headmaster of the academy looked up at the stars in the night sky and said, "There may be people who are born with knowledge in the world, but there are no omniscient people. No matter how much your youngest brother knows, there are always many things he doesn't understand. It's the same for me." It's said that the 7 volumes of arcane tomes were formed by Haotian's will. When I was still a green-robed scholar like you, I could understand the other 6 volumes. Now I'm old, but I still can't understand the words left by the monk on the Ming hand scroll. Eldest brother said sincerely, "I can't understand it either." "Nonsense. If I can't understand it, how can you understand it?" The headmaster of the academy looked at him and said with a smile, "But since you can't understand it, don't worry about it day and night." Eldest brother said, "I have to worry about it." The headmaster of the academy looked at him and said sternly, "If this is a story, no one knows how it will develop. You don't know, I don't know, and the world doesn't know. Then why do you think that the story will end like that?" Everyone in the back of the mountain of the academy knew that no matter how cute Chun Pippi pretended to be, and no matter how Ningke interjected, the headmaster's favorite disciple was always eldest brother. The headmaster rarely criticized eldest brother, and he had never reprimanded him so severely. After a long silence, eldest brother said, "If there is no worry about tomorrow, there will be worry about today." The headmaster of the academy said, "One should worry about today, not tomorrow." Eldest brother said, "If the headmaster is not worried about the future of the world, why did he let youngest brother go to the Lank temple?" The headmaster of the academy looked at the forest shrouded in silver light, and listened to the faint sound of the waterfall in the distance. He said, "The night your youngest brother killed Xiaoho, I found out that Song Song's illness was more serious than I thought. If I really used the West Hill divine skills to cure it, I'm afraid that there would be problems in the end. I let him take her to the Lank temple to see if the Buddhism sect could cure her illness." Eldest brother said sadly, "What if the illness can't be cured?" The headmaster of the academy turned to look at him and said, "If the illness can't be cured, your youngest brother will be very sad. So even if there is only a glimmer of hope, we have to work 100 times harder. Moreover, she shouldn't have gotten sick." "What about Haotian Taoism?" Eldest brother said, "Sang Sang is the successor of the divine priest of light of the West Hill Divine Palace. If Haotian Taoism knew that she was seriously ill, they would definitely be worried. They should have their own ways to cure her." The headmaster of the academy looked at his favorite disciple, and suddenly laughed mockingly. He said, "Cure and save. If Haotian Taoism knew how to cure and save people, why would I be so distressed now?" Sometimes I think that when we cure and save people, we may only cure and save our own illness. Eldest brother was thoughtful. The headmaster of the academy said seriously, "You love everyone in the world, so you can't only love one person. But your youngest brother is different. He doesn't love anyone in the world, but only one person. So after killing Xiaohou, he will be happy for the rest of his life. No one knows how far he can go in the future. But you have to bear the pain of struggling to make a choice. If you can't see through this pain, then your gains will be limited." There was silence. After a long time, a clean and gentle smile appeared on eldest brother's face again. He said, "Teacher, I'm willing to keep worrying like this. Because if I don't worry, I won't be me." The headmaster of the academy looked at him and said with admiration, "I was wrong. Your love for the world is not related to any education or stereotypes. It is purely from your heart. How can this limit your future? As for me, I'm still the wild grass swaying on the wall. I always want to move with the wind, but now I don't know where the wind comes from. I don't know what your youngest brother will encounter, but I believe that if he doesn't walk, then he will encounter nothing. As long as he walks, then he will meet the future. When he meets it, it will be the day when we meet the real future. Then we can think about what to do." The headmaster of the academy said with emotion, "It's a pity that the guy who wanted to quarrel with me for 3 days and 3 nights for a bowl of braised pork is already dead. Otherwise, I would like to ask him what he would do." It was unknown when second brother came to the hut. He had been standing quietly by the side, listening to the conversation between the headmaster and eldest brother. Until now, he finally couldn't help saying, "Teacher, although I don't understand what you and eldest brother are talking about, I think I can guess what youngest uncle will do." The headmaster of the academy's expression changed slightly. He stroked his beard and asked, "What will your youngest uncle do?" Second brother said matter-of-factly, "Fight." The headmaster of the academy found that these disciples were becoming more and more like him. They said everything matter-of-factly, but where was the reason? He asked in confusion, "Fight who?" Second brother was also confused. After a while he said seriously, "No matter who. I'm also going out. Greetings to everyone." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 505. The headmaster was furious and scolded. "How did I teach such an unreasonable guy like you?" Second brother was stunned. He thought that he had always been the headmaster's disciple, and everyone knew that he was the most reasonable person. Why did the headmaster say that he was unreasonable? Although Wenguo was not happy, he reflected on himself first. He bowed deeply and asked, "Master, last time when we talked about revenge in front of the cliff cave, you asked me to tell eldest brother that he must be resolute and decisive. Did I misunderstand?" The headmaster said angrily, "Your eldest brother is gentle and benevolent, so he needs you as a mirror to learn how to be more direct. But you are too direct, so I have always taught you to be more cautious. But now? You don't even understand what's going on. Yet you want to fight and kill. You only have the bravery of youngest uncle, but you don't have the courage of youngest uncle. All right, he indeed doesn't have anything else worth praising, but you and your youngest uncle, other than being braver than me, what else can you do?" Second brother was very particular about filial piety. Facing the headmaster's stern scolding, he should not defend himself. Even if he wanted to respect the reason, he should wait until the headmaster's anger subsided. But when he heard the headmaster mention his most respected youngest uncle, he did not know how to defend himself. "Headmaster, I remember what youngest uncle said to me and senior brother when we were young. If we only have courage left, then courage is all we have." The headmaster was stunned and suddenly laughed. He waved his sleeves and said, "That's reasonable. In fact, I also said this to your youngest brother. If the night really comes, we can just fight back. Why do we need to think so much?" The eldest brother thought of the words youngest uncle left behind when he left the back of the mountain on the black donkey. He did not smile like his teacher and younger brother, but became more and more worried. He said, Since we are going to resist, why don't we make some preparations before the night comes? The headmaster stopped smiling and said, because we don't know where the wind comes from and where the night comes from. Then everything we do in advance may be wrong. Of course, I hope all our guesses are wrong and the night doesn't come. Eldest brother looked up at the sky and sighed. If the night comes, the light should be the most important. Why does Hao Yin have no reaction? I really don't understand what the heavens are thinking. The headmaster looked up at the dark sky and said, look, it's what I said before. There is no omniscient person in the world. I don't know what the sky is thinking. It has been proving this for countless years, so at least we know that it is unknowable. Billions of people in the world had long forgotten the origin of the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival. The underworld still existed in their legends and childhood stories, but it had long become a real legend or story. No one believed that the underworld really existed, and no one believed in the nonsense of the underworld invasion. In the eyes of the people, the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was an important festival to worship ancestors and feed ghosts. The orchid pots placed along the streets, the young girls dressed in traditional clothes, all kinds of tempting food, and the custom of lanterns made the festival not tainted with the slightest bit of gloomy and ghostly aura. Instead, it was full of beautiful and charming images. The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival at the Lang Temple was naturally a grand event in the cultivation world. The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival itself was also a grand event in the world. Other than cultivators, there were also countless tourists, pilgrims, and official delegations from various countries. They set off from different cities and headed towards the Lang Temple. The Tang Empire also sent a delegation according to the old custom. The level of the delegation was very high. To everyone's surprise, the envoy who represented His Majesty to tour the world was the Jinshi General Xian Jilong. The Jinshi General was one of the 4 royal generals of the Tang Empire. After Xiaoho's death, his status became even more important. General Xian Jilong himself was also a legendary figure. His martial arts cultivation state was extremely ordinary, but he had made many military achievements with his exquisite battlefield command. He had been continuously promoted until today. In the military of the Tang Empire, which revered military force, 3 of the 4 generals were experts at the peak of martial arts. Xian Jilong's individual force was so weak, but he could stand shoulder to shoulder with the other 3. Just from this point, it could be imagined that he had an amazing ability in intelligence or other aspects. Such a figure was definitely qualified to represent the Tang Empire to tour the world. However, the envoy was usually a civil official. Even if His Majesty wanted to show enough respect to the Buddhism sect, it would be enough to send a noble civil official with a title. Why would he send a general? Therefore, this appointment still caused a great controversy in Chang, and it aroused great doubts in the South Jin Kingdom. Who knew if the general would look at the scenery or the city defense along the way? Who knew if the warlike Tang Empire wanted to start a new war? In the end, people confirmed from some gossip that the reason why His Majesty sent Xian Jilong was mainly because of the following reasons. After Xiaoho's death, the position of Marshal of the Northeast Border Military, which he had once held, was still vacant. The Yueluan Kingdom in the west of the Tang Empire was no longer a threat, so Xian Jilong wanted to be transferred to Tuyang City. Everyone knew that Her Highness in the Princess's mansion had been trying to win over the great general of the West in recent years. This news directly caused the Empress to be furious. In order to appease his wife's anger, His Majesty had to temporarily put aside the transfer order. In order to appease his daughter and the important general of the country, he simply sent General Xian to the Lang Temple to relax. His Majesty's actions were close to fooling around. He was completely treating the affairs of the country as a family matter, which made people not know whether to laugh or cry. However, it also made many men who were troubled by family matters feel a lot of sympathy, and it also made those young girls who yearned for love feel even more admiration. Accompanying the envoy to the Lang Temple was the dance troupe of the House of Red Sleeves. 30 years ago, after the former emperor of the Tang Empire forcibly summoned the House of Red Sleeves from the South Jin Kingdom to Chang'an, the daughters of the House of Red Sleeves only went to the Lang Temple to participate in the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival once. Since then they had never left Chang'an. After more than 20 years, the House of Red Sleeves went out again and attracted a lot of attention. All eyes were on the official envoy of the Tang Empire. No one noticed that about a dozen miles behind the envoy, there was a black horse carriage traveling alone on the official road. The wall of the black horse carriage was engraved with complicated and indescribable lines that looked like heavy brocade. Looking at the cold reflection, it seemed to be made of iron and should be extremely heavy. However, the strange thing was that the black horse that was pulling the carriage was leisurely. The carriage traveled on the official road silently, as if it was as light as a feather. The great general of the Tang Empire, the East and the West. Why are all the Tang Empire's generals in the West? I wonder when there will be a Zheng Guanxi. Come to think of it, you don't know who Zheng Guanxi is. In the carriage, Ning Ke leaned on the soft couch and said with a satisfied expression, "This black horse carriage was a magnificent legacy left to him by his master, Yen Sei." It looked ordinary and cold, even a little stiff, but the carriage was very spacious and the equipment was extremely luxurious and comfortable. The carriage was made of stainless steel and was extremely heavy. In the beginning, when he did not have the ability to activate the talisman lines engraved on the carriage, the big black horse was in great pain. When the wheels ran over the carriage, the earth cracked. The wheels were also made of steel, but they did not have any effect on the shock absorption. It was extremely uncomfortable for him, so he rarely sat in this carriage. Now, as he cultivated, his great spirit became stronger and his state gradually improved. Especially after the guidance of Seventh Sister, he finally understood that the lines on the carriage wall were not pure talismans, but a kind of compound talisman array. After mastering the talisman array on the carriage wall, the faint aura of heaven and earth lingered around the black horse carriage and produced some kind of buoyancy. The heavy black horse carriage became a feather floating in the water. No matter how hard the wheels were, the people sitting in the carriage would not feel the bumps. The painful journey suddenly became a pleasure. However, although the talisman array on the carriage wall was permanent and could summon the aura of heaven and earth in nature, it also needed the aura of heaven and earth to maintain the talisman array. If Ning Ke did not want to die of exhaustion of his psyche power, he had to put a gem in the array eye of the carriage every once in a while. This kind of gem, which contained a relatively high concentration of the qi of heaven and earth, was extremely precious. It was hard to find even in the jewelry shops in Chang'an. Now the black horse carriage could travel so easily on the long journey because he had gone to the Imperial Center Administration and the Southern Gate Temple to cheat and rob a box of gems. The black horse carriage was very luxurious, and the amount of gems it consumed made it even more luxurious. If he was not Mr. 13 of the Academy, and if he did not have the resources provided by the entire Tang Empire, it would be impossible for him to do so. Ning Ke understood this. When he represented the Academy to enter the human realm, his senior brother had also told him this. Therefore, although he did not want to care about these things in the imperial court, he had to care. Xian Jilong is a very interesting person, he said. Sang Sang closed her eyes and softly hummed. Her body had basically recovered. The reason why she closed her eyes and hummed so softly was that she felt so comfortable that she did not want to open her eyes, let alone speak. Ning Ke and sixth brother had opened a skylight on the roof of the horse carriage. The blazing summer sun penetrated through the skylight and sprinkled on her body, warming her up all the way. The black horse carriage was made of stainless steel. No matter the color or the material, it was the best to absorb heat. However, perhaps because of the cold aura in Song Song's body, the horse carriage still seemed so cool after being exposed to the scorching sun for a long time. It did not feel stuffy at all. Ning Ke did not feel hot at all. Song Song's cold little feet were always in his arms. It was very comfortable, as if he was holding two little jade fish that had been frozen for a few days. He moved Song Song's little feet a little and reached out to pick up a delicate small porcelain pot on the low table beside him. He took a sip of the delightfully fragrant tea and turned to look out of the window. He saw the farmland on both sides of the official road outside the window. Some farmers were painting their homes, some willows were swaying in the wind, and some naked children were playing in the paddy fields. These scenes always made people feel happy. Ning-Kei looked at those naked, dark-skinned naughty children and felt that he had seen them somewhere before. Then he realized that as long as he walked in the territory of the Tang Empire, it would be easy to see similar scenes, because happiness was always similar. He looked at Song Song's dark little face and smiled, thinking that this long journey was actually not bad even if there was no end. At this moment, the big black horse seemed to feel his thoughts and happily neighed. Homology in progress. I'm also on my journey today. I know it's not fun to read one chapter a day, but if I can keep updating and try not to open the skylight, I'm really working hard. I strongly recommend a novel to everyone to fill our lonely days. The novel is called Grandmaster of Dreams. I don't know the author. This is not an advertisement. I'm just a reader who likes reading this book. The word homology comes from this book. This novel has no 3 views and now it seems to have no bottom line. I like it. It's very good. I seriously recommend it to everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 506. The black horse carriage tailed the convoy of the diplomatic corps. When they were about to reach a county, there were more buildings on both sides of the official road. Ning-Kei still liked the scenery of the countryside, so he let the big black horse get off the official road and onto the slightly narrow but still smooth county road. Anyway, he was confident that he would not lose the diplomatic corps in front of him. The countryside scenery on both sides of the county road was even more beautiful, with some primitive and simple flavor. After traveling for a long time, they looked at the village in front of them and the black horse carriage stopped under a big tree outside the village. The big tree was unknown, but the area of the canopy was huge, with lush green leaves. It was like a big umbrella, blocking the blazing sun and casting a shadow. Ning-Kei untied the big black horse and let it play on its own. He walked under the big green tree and touched the thick bark, with a happy smile on his face. His fellow disciples of the academy did not like to leave the mountain, because they cared more about their own spiritual realm. Pure spiritual happiness was enough to make them feel fulfilled, but he was different. He had lived in Min Mountain since he was a child, and the forest was like home to him. Moreover, he had been used to wandering since he was a child, so he did not like to stay in one place for a long time. He had stood in the forest countless times and looked at the distant villages with smoke coming out of the chimneys, and carried Sang Sang away silently because of fear. It was probably because of this that he was extremely fascinated by the scenery of the villages. That year before returning to Chang'an, he chose to hold Song Song's hand and walk through the fields and villages because of this mentality. At this time he chose a remote county road and stopped outside the village because of this mentality. Sang Sang got off the horse carriage and looked at him shyly. She said, "I fell asleep earlier." Ning-Kei said, "It's so comfortable. I want to have a good sleep too." Obviously, Sang Sang had not adapted to the change of her role. She was used to thinking that she was still a little handmaiden. It was really inappropriate for her to just fall asleep like that. In order to make up for this mistake, she tried to remember the last sentence she heard before falling asleep and asked, "How is it interesting?" Ning-Kei was stunned for a moment before he realized that she was answering his question from 2 hours ago. He could not help but want to laugh. Looking at her serious expression, he did not want to discourage her, so he answered, "Before leaving Chang'an, Chan 7 came to talk to me. He said that General Xian had been in the Fish Dragon gang for a period of time in his early years, and had a good relationship with Chao Xiaoshu. The early years mentioned here were even before Chi 4 and the others. But I don't know why Chao Xiaoshu still lived in Spring Breeze Pavilion after General Xian became a general." "You mean there is something wrong with this person?" Sang Sang asked. Only Ning-Kei could understand Song Song's words. When she said there was something wrong with a person, she did not mean that this person should be suspected or had something to be vigilant about, but that this person was not good. Ning-Kei shook his head and said, "Even if there is something wrong with him, it is the arrangement of His Majesty. Even if he is really determined to get the northeast border military as the rumors in Chang'an City say, it only shows that he has the pride, confidence and ambition that a soldier should have. The emperor is not in a hurry, and the eunuch is not in a hurry, let alone us. Sang Sang said. I heard that Her Majesty is very unhappy. Ning Ke said. Don't forget that His Majesty is also my teacher's student, which means that he is my senior brother. He is a really wise person. How could such a person really treat national affairs as a family affair? He is just taking advantage of Her Majesty's anger to warn some people. Sang Sang asked curiously who. In fact, she was not curious about these things. So she opened her eyes wide and pretended to be curious, which was very deliberate, very childish and very cute. So Ning Ke kissed her on her little face. Sang Sang was a little shy, but she did not avoid it. She did not avoid it, not because she was flustered and helpless, but because she thought it was natural for her to be kissed by Ning Quebec. So kiss him if you want. Looking at the little girl's bright eyes, Ning Ke was a little flustered. He coughed twice and continued. Of course it is to suppress General Xian. No, to be more precise, His Majesty is warning his daughter not to get too deep into the army. Why? Is His Majesty going to pass the throne to Her Majesty's son? Sang Sang asked curiously. This time she was really curious because Liu was one of her few friends in Chang'an City, and also because she knew that this matter had something to do with Ning Quebec. Ning Ke said, I don't know. Anyway, this matter has nothing to do with us. Even if he said it had nothing to do with them, it still had something to do with them. Otherwise, why would he think about these problems? Just like the girls from the House of Red Sleeves in the diplomatic corps dozens of miles away, it was also a problem that he had to consider. Mistress Jian did not ask him to take care of those girls along the way. But with his relationship with the House of Red Sleeves, if something really happened, he could not stand by and do nothing. In addition to their relationship, more importantly, the Academy had the responsibility to take care of the House of Red Sleeves. The girl named Xiao Xiao 30 years ago was the fiancée of youngest uncle, and almost became their youngest aunt. She was Mistress Jian's biological sister. More than 20 years ago, the last time the House of Red Sleeves performed abroad was when they were invited to the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival in the Lank Temple. It was also at that festival that their youngest aunt died. Now, after more than 20 years, the House of Red Sleeves would appear in the Lank Temple again. How could Ning Ke not be vigilant? At this moment, Ning Ke suddenly felt that someone was approaching. He could not help but raise his eyebrows and look toward the direction of the big tree. He saw a black shadow sweeping over like lightning. With his eyesight, of course, he could clearly see that the black shadow was the big black horse. What made him vigilant was what had happened to make the big black horse so flustered. After all, except for the natural disaster more than 10 years ago, the public security of the Tang Empire had always been good. Ning Ke was not worried about his own safety. Even if there were rare bandits, he did not mind killing them and making a name for the Academy. It did not matter even if they were cultivators. First he defeated Guan Hai, then killed Dao Shi, blinded Lu Yiqing and finally defeated Xiahou. Someone's strength had been proven countless times. Although Wang Jinglu was not convinced, there was a consensus in the cultivation world that Ning Ke, Mr. 13 of the Academy, was the real first person below the knowing destiny state. Moreover, with Sang Sang, the successor of the great divine priest of light, by his side, Ning Ke could even fight with a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. Of course, those grand cultivators who had entered the knowing destiny state must be very clear about his and Song Song's identity and background. Who would be so free to provoke the Academy and the West Hill Divine Palace at the same time? The big black horse ran back to Ning Ke and Sang Sang, leaving a trail of smoke and dust. It kept panting and looked extremely panicked. Ning Ke looked solemnly at the smoke and dust. As the smoke and dust gradually dissipated, a bare-chested man holding a pitchfork rushed over, yelling and yelling. Stop running, stupid horse. I'll beat you to death. Things were soon explained. It turned out that the big black horse was walking around and smelling the fragrance of the village in front of him. He could not control his mind and followed the smell to the window. He poked his head into the window and secretly ate the farmer's food. Then he was discovered by the farmer's owner and caused this chase. Ning Ke glared at the big black horse and thought to himself, "You are such a useless fool. I, your young master, feed you with yellow spirit fruits every day. And you still want to steal other people's food. Moreover, it was so frightened and panting that it wanted to die after being chased by a farmer with a pitchfork. The big black horse lowered his head in shame and looked extremely honest. He thought silently that it was his fault for not being able to stop himself from eating. If he did not look embarrassed, who knew how he would be punished by Ningquebec? Ningke looked at the farmer and apologized with a bitter smile. The farmer supported himself with the pitchfork and held his waist. He was so tired that he was panting. He said, "This guy runs so damn fast. He is indeed a good horse. No wonder the bowl of porridge I cooked was swallowed in one gulp." Ningke felt even more embarrassed when he heard that the big black horse had secretly eaten a bowl of porridge. He said with a bitter smile, "He is used to eating and being lazy. He is not much better." The farmer heard this and shook his head disapprovingly. He said, "When I was in the cavalry camp, I did not see anything better than him. Even the general's mount is not as good as him." The Tang Empire implemented a 3-year recruitment system. In order to open up new territory, the army was not small. In addition, people worshipped martial arts, so many men had experience in the army. Ningke was not surprised when he heard this and knew that the farmer had retired from the army. He took out some money and handed it over. He said, "This is the money for the pot of porridge. The pot must be dirty, so it is counted as well." The farmer waved his hand carelessly and said, "I saw this handsome horse through the window and guessed that it had an owner. So I came to have a look. I don't need money for porridge." Ningke said with a smile, "If you don't need money for porridge, why did you come to have a look?" The farmer said matter-of-factly, "That's because you have a good attitude. If you are not polite, I will not only need money for porridge, but also the wages for cooking porridge." This kind of matter-of-factness was common in the academy and among the Tangs. Ningke liked it very much. He said with a smile, "If so, I will not beat around the bush." The farmer looked at the black horse carriage and Sang Sang, who was wearing a handmaiden uniform. He guessed that they were resting here temporarily. He invited them. "It is not convenient to talk here. Let's go to my house." Ningke was good at dealing with people and liked the farmer's temperament. But he was still the indifferent lad in his bones. He wanted to decline when he heard this. Unexpectedly, the farmer insisted and said, "Since we are going to travel a long distance, we should always have clean water. If you care, you can even give me money when you leave." Ningke still wanted to decline. The farmer looked at him and frowned. He said, "I can tell that you have been in the military camp. How can you be so wishy-washy?" Ningke looked at the farmer's resolute eyes and suddenly thought of the city of Wei that he had not seen for a long time. He thought of the soldiers in the city of Wei and the 3 sentences he left for General Ma before he left. "Then let's go," he said with a smile, "but I still want to drink." The farmer laughed and said, "Homemade grain wine. No matter how good it is, it will be enough. Have a good weekend." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 507. Catch them. Don't let them escape. Don't let them enter the mountain. These bandits are all F***king rats. Kill them all. Leave no captives. A fierce battle took place in the mountainous area at the border of the South Jin Kingdom. In the dusk, one could hear the whistling of arrows, the clashing of swords, and the desperate howls before death. There were less than 500 people on both sides of the battle. However, in the south of the mainland that had been peaceful for a long time, a battle that could leave dozens of corpses was certainly considered fierce. One side of the battle was the regular cavalry of the South Jin Kingdom. They were well trained and had the upper hand in combat. Moreover, they outnumbered the other side. So they quickly won the battle and began to chase after the bandits. The dozens of people who were being chased ran into the deep mountains in panic. From time to time, someone was shot in the back and fell into the bushes howling in pain. Fortunately, it was late and the mountain path was dangerous. Finally, most of them managed to escape. The dark night shrouded the Sunset Mountain. Occasionally, the strange cries of crows could be heard from the depths of the dense forest. This mountain was part of the vast mountains of the West Hill Divine Kingdom, but it was deep within the territory of the South Jin Kingdom. Beside the bonfire, there were dozens of wounded people lying down. Some were shot by arrows while others had their arms cut off by axes. The wounded people groaned in pain from time to time. Several men in black and gold armor sat in the warmest place closest to the bonfire. It was obvious that their status in the team was higher than the rest of the people. Their armors were decorated with dense golden patterns. It was obvious that they were extremely expensive and did not look like something a group of mountain bandits would have. Hearing the cries of their companions and the cries of crows in the forest, their faces grew paler and paler. They could not help but look at their silent leader, as if they wanted to get some comfort from him. The leader was a middle-aged man who also wore black armor. However, the golden patterns on his armor were even denser and faintly emitted a faint talisman aura. The middle-aged man was called Zimo. He used to be the cavalry commander of the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace. The men around the bonfire were like him. They used to be cavalry commanders of the Divine Hall. When Yi Hongyu killed the former great divine priest of judgment and ascended to the seat of heavenly black jade, these powerhouses who had made great contributions to the West Hill Divine Palace were cruelly destroyed of their cultivation and chased out of Peach Mountain. In the past few years, the papal cavalrymen under their command were the most powerful armed force of the judicial department of the Divine Hall. At least in the battle to hunt down the remnants of the devil's doctrine and the heretics, the bloody storm that the judicial department stirred up in the world and left a gloomy impression on the world were mostly recorded by them. In other words, the hands of these former commanders were stained with too much blood. They had no country to return to, and no one dared to take them in at the risk of angering the current divine priest of judgment. Yi Hongyu's punishment was very thorough. She stripped them of their power and cultivation. She didn't even let go of the wealth that they had plundered over the years. In the end, she only left them an old horse, 100 taels of silver, and all their retinue. They also had this black gold armor that once represented glory and majesty, but now it could not even bring back memories. It only brought shame and fear. They did not dare to return to the West Hill Divine Kingdom and had nowhere to go. Thus, they could only wander around the countries on the periphery of the West Hill. The taels of silver were soon spent. These commanders suddenly realized that they were like those lowly ants. They had to start thinking about their next meal and where to hide. These former commanders of the Divine Hall had their own skills to make a living. However, they were all extremely prideful people. How could they possibly ask them to do manual labor or something like that? The most troublesome thing was that their years in the West Hill Divine Palace had nurtured their habit of bossing people around. They were high and mighty, and treated mortals like dogs. In the past, these habits and attitudes could be called majesty. Now that they had left the West Hill and become ordinary people, these had become obstacles in their lives. One day, the former commander's team had an incident with a tyrant from the Kingdom of Song. One commander could no longer suppress his anger, and ordered his retinue to cut off the tyrant's head. Then they broke into the tyrant's manor and robbed him of all the gold and silver. They stayed in a luxurious inn in the state capital, and enjoyed the wine and women brought by the gold and silver. Suddenly, these former commanders who had been in a daze for several days found a way to survive without bowing and scraping. This method was simple and direct, and they could earn money very quickly. Although their cultivation had been destroyed and they were not even as strong as ordinary men, they were once the cavalry commanders of the West Hill Divine Palace. They had excellent strategies and commanding skills. The retinue that followed them were also very powerful. At least, they could not be compared to the guards in the secular society. So naturally they began to rob for a living. In a very short period of time, they successively raided several large clans in the countryside. During this process everyone, including ZMO, remained silent and did not say anything. However, they knew very well that they, who had once sworn to protect light and justice, were falling into a bottomless black abyss. They still felt extremely humiliated and painful in their hearts. Fortunately, they now had a lot of gold and silver, so they could buy a lot of strong wine and women to numb themselves and live one day at a time. Unfortunately, this numbing accelerated the speed of their depravity. They became more and more violent during robberies. Some even started to rape and even kill. Zmo clearly realized that if this continued, there would definitely be problems. He tried his best to restrain them. However, the Divine Hall commanders who had begun to fall were like tigers released from their cages. They fell from the glorious Peach Mountain to the dirty dust. This stimulated them even more, and they could not be restrained at all. One day in midsummer, during a routine robbery at night, one of the commanders or retinue went crazy and beheaded an aristocrat who had already surrendered. The atmosphere of madness suddenly spread, and a tragic massacre took place in the manor. Accompanied by despairing cries, the aristocrat's entire family was killed. Robberies were naturally accompanied by death, and even rape was not rare. However, to kill a South Jean aristocrat's family, especially when the manor was not far from the capital of the South Jean Kingdom, they were in big trouble. This massacre did not alarm the powerhouses in the Sword Garret, but it was enough to alarm the imperial court of the South Jean Kingdom. During the investigation, the imperial court of the South Jean Kingdom was quite cautious when they found out that the murderers were wearing the armor of the cavalry commander of the Divine Hall. They sent letters to the West Hill Divine Palace, confirming that these people were sinners who had been expelled from the Peach Mountain, and were no longer entitled to the protection of the Divine Hall. Thus, the imperial court of the South Jean Kingdom's caution at the beginning turned into anger. The South Jean Kingdom began to distribute arrest warrants, and offered a high reward to the informants. On these arrest warrants, these murderers were given a new name, Fallen Knights. The South Jean Kingdom was powerful, second only to the Tang Empire. Now that they were being treated so seriously, these Fallen Knights, no matter how sharp their eyes were or how good their commanders were all useless. They suddenly fell into a miserable situation and fled in all directions miserably. In the process of fleeing, retinue constantly died or ran away. Even these commanders were killed and several others were seriously injured. The troop that had left the West Hill with more than 100 people was now left with only a few dozen. Today, they were almost completely annihilated in the encirclement outside the forest. Beside the bonfire, painful howls echoed incessantly. Their expressions were so desperate and gloomy. "Are we waiting for death here?" A strong and burly retinue stood up and walked to the bonfire. Looking at his companions who were mostly injured by arrows because they did not have armor, he said loudly, "Why don't we leave?" Retinue were equivalent to the servants of knights. They were most particular about loyalty. Once they betrayed their master, no one would take them in. However, this person said that he wanted to leave, which proved that the current situation was indeed at its most critical moment. A cavalry commander looked at this retinue with a gloomy expression. He roared angrily, "Guanu, I've treated you well. If it weren't for me, how could you be in this situation today? How dare you betray me? Don't forget that your retinue is also on the arrest warrant. Where can you go?" The retinue called Guanu looked at his master and sneered. "I've worked hard for you for so many years, but now I've fallen into this situation. How can you say that you've treated me well? As for the arrest warrant, except for your masters who have portraits, who would know such insignificant people like us? We've also robbed a lot of money these days. Let's go our separate ways. Who can find us if we hide?" The commander said angrily, "Don't forget that the money is with me." Guanu looked at him disdainfully and said, "I know you won't give the money to you. Knights like you won't let us off even if you die. However, don't forget that your cultivation has already been crippled by the divine priest of judgment. You're now a bunch of useless people. Do you still think it's the same as before?" He looked at the retinue sitting around the bonfire and shouted, "What are you still hesitating for? It's all because of our efforts that we've been able to rob so much money these days. These fellows have long been crippled. They can't even pick up a knife, so how can they be a match for us?" The bonfire was not very strong, and the forest further away was dark. It was impossible to see the expressions on the faces of the retinue, but it was possible to faintly see that they had all raised their heads. The commanders had once been high and mighty. They could bestow favors on their retinue and could also treat them like livestock. Tonight, their own retinue had actually rebelled. It was truly an unbearable humiliation. However, they had to admit that the current situation was extremely dangerous. If they handled things carelessly, they really could end up as corpses in the forest. At this moment, Guanu's voice came to an abrupt halt. An extremely thin metal wire had unknowingly appeared on his neck, and then suddenly tightened. The metal wire sank deep into his skin, and blood instantly gushed out. Guanu's eyes widened in horror. His hands desperately dug at his neck, trying to dig out the metal wire. However, his actions were futile. The more he struggled, the deeper the metal wire sank. Layer by layer it cut through his windpipe, then his esophagus and all his blood vessels. Please vote for me. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 508. Sizzle. Blood kept spurting out from Guanu's neck and fell into the bonfire, giving off a very faint burnt smell. He collapsed on the ground and kicked his legs desperately. His boots kicked up clumps of mud, but he still could not stop the arrival of death, and could not stop his crotch from being wet with urine. Some retinue stood up in shock, but no one dared to move because of years of prestige. Zemo's face appeared in the dark. He used his hand, which was no longer strong but still stable, to take back the metal wire around Guanu's neck and wipe off the remaining blood and flesh. He looked at the retinues with complicated expressions around the bonfire and said expressionlessly, "Even a disabled person is not someone you can disrespect. Never underestimate the means we have learned in the judicial department. So if you don't want to die, you'd better stay calm." The retinues slowly sat back down and lowered their heads. No one knew what they were thinking or if they were really calm. The current crisis was temporarily resolved, but the commanders in front of the bonfire still looked extremely pale and gloomy, just like their mood at this time. Their desperate future was one of the reasons. The most important thing was that they still could not accept the reality. They used to be respected commanders of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. Even the generals of the South Jin Kingdom had to be respectful when they saw them. But now a random state army of the South Jin Kingdom dared to besiege them, and they were besieged so miserably that even their own retinues dared to betray them. "Your Excellency, what should we do?" A divine commander's voice trembled as he asked in despair. Zmo was the most experienced and powerful among these fallen cavalrymen of Divine Hall commanders. He was elected as the leader by the crowd. At this time they could only hope that he could come up with a solution. Zmo also did not know what to do. Where could these disabled and defeated soldiers go next? In fact, if it weren't for the punishment of the Divine Hall of Judgment, they could still be honored guests of all countries with their wisdom and strategies, as well as their ability to command on the battlefield. However, the Divine Hall of Judgment had cut off this possibility in advance. Every time he thought of this, his hatred and fear for the young divine priest grew stronger. Now the only thing he could rely on was himself. Only by restoring his strength and becoming strong again could he survive in this world. However, how could he become strong again when his cultivation was destroyed? The legendary elixir was just a legend after all. Zmo laughed at himself, then said in a low voice, "Wash up and go to sleep." Hot water was nowhere to be found in the wilderness. While escaping, he could not care about enjoyment and could only sleep. Someone used soil to extinguish the bonfire, and the forest suddenly became pitch black. The thick clouds in the night sky covered all the stars, indicating that there might be a storm tomorrow. Some of them could not bear the exhaustion brought about by the escape and fell into a deep sleep. Some people could not sleep while imagining a hopeless future. Zihei looked at the dark night above his head and thought of the heavy rain tomorrow. His heart became heavier and heavier. He slowly clenched his trembling hands in extreme pain. He desperately and unwillingly thought, "If I can regain my strength and become as strong as before, then I'm willing to give my life and everything to Netherworld King." In the silent night forest, there were still many people praying in despair. The sky was gloomy, but there was no rain, nor was there a rainstorm. However, there were clouds covering the sun, and the midsummer journey became much cooler. Since there was no sun, Sang Sang did not need to bask in the sun through the skylight of the horse carriage. Ning Ke naturally occupied that position. He stepped on the soft couch and stretched his upper body out of the skylight. Facing the wind blowing on the official road, he looked at the surrounding scenery and felt a sense of joy like a rich man. It had been a few days since they left Chang'an, and the black horse carriage had been following the diplomatic mission from afar. Although they had taken several county roads along the way, they were never worried about losing track of them due to the intelligence reports from the government, especially from the secret guards. It was the same even when they left the wilderness and entered the mountains in the south. A vast range of mountains appeared in the middle of the southern wilderness of the Tang Empire, dividing the territory into two regions. Perhaps the mountains had a certain influence on the climate. The same fertile soil in the south and north of the mountains produced very different crops. However, the black horse carriage was traveling in the mountains at this time, so Ning Ke and Sang Sang did not feel any difference. Compared with the familiar Min Mountain, the mountains in the south of the Tang Empire were not so high. However, because the rock was special and easily dissolved in water, there were landslides all year round, which made the peaks strange and steep, extremely difficult to climb. Fortunately, there was a valley with dense green plants in the mountains, and the bottom of the valley was a natural passage. Otherwise, if they wanted to connect the north and the south, they might have to detour for more than 1,000 miles. Hundreds of years ago, the Tang Empire used a lot of manpower and material resources to widen the valley, and used talisman masters and tactical array masters to strengthen the two loose and dangerous cliffs of the valley. Then they planted numerous trees with developed roots that could stabilize the rocks, and finally, the natural road in the valley became a very smooth official road. The black horse carriage traveled on the smooth official road and in the quiet valley. Ning Ke leaned out of the skylight and squinted to enjoy the scenery on both sides of the official road. Looking at the green and calm cliffs, he imagined the great transformation of nature by the Tang people hundreds of years ago. He thought of the talisman masters and tactical array masters with white hair because of the exhaustion of psyche power, and the soldiers and craftsmen who fell off the cliffs. He could not help but feel a little heroic. This heroic feeling had nothing to do with the skylight of the black horse carriage, and had nothing to do with the rich man. The Tang Empire had gone through so much difficulty to open up this mountain range and connect the central and southern territories. It was easy to imagine the strategic importance of this beautiful and verdant valley. Ning Ke could faintly see that there were extremely dangerous and steep mountain paths in the distance of the valley. Beside those mountain paths, there were extremely simple and crude guard stations a few miles away. Looking at the scale of the buildings in the guard stations, there were probably no more than 10 Tang soldiers stationed there. Thinking of the Tang soldiers stationed in the boring guard stations all year round, even someone as indifferent as Ning Ke could not help but feel a sense of admiration. Even the most verdant valley would be a little boring after looking at it for too long. Even the most heroic emotions would calm down after a long time, and even the most vicissitudes of history would become indifferent after experiencing it for a long time. Ning Ke sat back in the horse carriage and drank the herbal tea on the short table. When he calmed down, he picked up the brush and began to write. The purpose of going to the Lang Temple this time was to cure and save people. At the same time, he was also seeking Buddhism, so there should not be any danger. However, Ning Ke still maintained the habits of his youth. He was always ready to face a battle of life and death. Therefore, he was not writing a calligraphy section, but a talisman. The talismans he had written in the past 2 years had all been used on Xia Ho in the battle at the Winter Lake. He had to prepare more now. After some time, Ning Ke raised his head and put down his brush to rest. He rubbed his eyes and looked out of the window. He found that he was still in the valley and could not help but be a little surprised at how long the valley was. When he was writing the talisman, Sang Sang was tidying up the luggage beside him. She touched something and looked at it for a long time before she guessed what it was. She frowned and asked, "How did it become like this?" She held a small iron kettle in her hand. Looking at the deep lines on the outside of the kettle, it should be the same kind of thing as the small iron kettle that had exploded in the lotus field of the Snow Lake. However, it was much smaller and the shape was also very different. The most obvious difference was that there was an extra bayonet at the bottom of the small iron kettle. This is a whimsical idea of fourth brother. Who would have thought that sixth brother would really do it? Before we left the academy, we tried it once. That day, you and Xiaotang went to the back of the mountain to pick wisteria and cook meat, so you didn't see it. Ningke took the small iron kettle that looked a little delicate. It seemed more accurate to call it a small iron tube now. Took out a talisman arrow from the iron box and inserted it into the bayonet at the bottom of the small iron tube. With a click, the arrow and the bayonet of the small iron tube were locked tightly. It was so tight that there was not a gap, and it seemed to be unusually stable. Sang reached out to try it and said it won't fall. Since he was a little older, Ningke's weapons had been handled by her personally. She was very experienced in sharpening knives and repairing bowstrings. If she said it wouldn't fall, then it wouldn't. Ningke took out the iron bow and assembled it. He put the talisman arrow in the small iron tube on the bowstring and calmly looked out of the window at the verdant canyon cliff trees that kept moving backward. His breathing gradually calmed down. The primordial 13 arrows were originally extremely terrifying weapons. Now that the people at the back of the mountain of the academy had forcibly added such a thing, it could be imagined that once it was shot, it would definitely cause a great commotion. This was not the back of the mountain of the academy, so Ningke could not really shoot it out. Otherwise, if he shot down the cliff that the previous generation of talisman masters and tactical array masters had painstakingly reinforced, even the headmaster of the academy would not spare him, let alone His Majesty. After a moment, he put down the iron bow in his hand and said a few words. Sang shook her head and took the iron arrow from his hand. She said, although it's not a big problem, the tail of the arrow has to be adjusted. The original talisman arrow could ignore wind resistance and even use the wind as a help. But now the talisman arrow has to be heavier. The most troublesome thing is that the area of the arrowhead facing the wind is too large. If you still want to ensure the accuracy, the shooting distance will definitely be greatly shortened. Ningke stuffed the bow and arrow into her arms and reached out to take a water radish. He started to chew it and said in a very irresponsible manner, "It's up to you." The black horse carriage finally drove out of the verdant canyon and came to the southernmost plain of the Tang Empire. The scenery on both sides of the state highway suddenly opened up, but the wind became a little gentler because there was more water. Ningke's attention was still on the vast mountains behind him. The moment he came out of the canyon, he suddenly thought that there were countless tactical arrays and talismans set up by the predecessors in the canyon. If a strong enemy were to invade from the south in the future, he only needed a great divine talisman master like Yensei to dispel these tactical arrays and talismans to block the canyon. Even if more than 10,000 cavalry came to attack, it would be impossible for them to attack the heart of the Tang Empire at a high speed. Soon he rejected his own idea. There were so many tactical arrays and talismans in the canyon, and it was impossible for one person to destroy them, even if his master was reborn. Unless the Empire had already tampered with these tactical arrays when they opened up the canyon. And even if the cliff collapsed and the road was blocked, the mountains would block the Tang Empire's reinforcements from the south at the same time. In the war, only a simple road was needed. The strong enemy who had the courage and strength to attack the Tang Empire must have enough tactical array masters and talisman masters to forcibly open a road for the cavalry to drive. Then the initiative of the battlefield might fall into the hands of these enemies. Therefore, his war deduction still needed a peerless powerhouse to guard the exit of the verdant canyon. That powerhouse must be strong enough to kill the Buddha, the devil, and the Taoist priest. Moreover, he could not rest, let alone sleep, eat, or drink. He might even have to fight with the enemy's powerhouses for 3 days and 3 nights. Thinking of this, Ningke could not help laughing. He thought that there was no such a powerful person in the world. Even if there was, how could such a powerful person be so stupid to fall into a situation of certain death? I am looking forward to the future in advance. Green Mountain Verdant Canyon. See you in the next volume. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Li Mei Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.